Hey guys, Anime Fanfics here. This is chapters 44 to 48 of Obito's redemption story by Yaboy Assassin on Wattpad. Links to all stories are in the description below, and make sure to like the video and subscribe to my channel. Chapter 44. Silence had been the norm for Obito's residence even before the future Team 7 had joined the house. But now it felt even more so. The three had gone into their separate rooms and had yet to make even the slightest noise, which would be surprising considering their profession, but Obito knew it was deeper than that. He wasn't the most talkative person, but he knew something was off between the three. Especially when he knew how much they trusted each other in battle. "They're rather quiet, husband," his wife said, walking into the living room. "I thought kids their age would be much louder." "Yeah," Obito agreed with a slight nod, a little too deep in thought but able to hear her still. "I suppose they've seen a bit too much during their time as shinobi." All of a sudden, his wife froze. "If they are from the future as you've told me, wouldn't it be better for your friends and the Hokage? If something bad happens, it would be better to fix it." "There's no need," he responded coolly. "I'm handling this problem. And besides, messing with time even more than we are now could be dangerous, especially if something were to happen that no one would be able to stop. The best way to avoid that is to let the kids sit still until I kill Yarashiki and send them back home." She nodded. "Of course, husband. Whatever you wish." He knew more about the topic than she did and was one of the most powerful ninja the village had ever produced. He seemed to know what he was talking about anyway. "I hate to put this burden on you, but I need you to keep an eye on them." "You're leaving?" she asked, turning to him. "I have a meeting to attend. I'll be back later today," he said, pushing off the wall he had been leaning on. "Oh, okay. Be safe," she said after a small bit of pause. Obito's mind had recalled what his sister had said about him not even trying to form any kind of connection, and he gave a sigh. He didn't want to do this, but being in a relationship with him hadn't given Yukina any room to be happy unless she found solace in the fact that he was never around, which he didn't even know. He could admit that he didn't know anything about his wife other than her name and family, and everything that she had told him he had forgotten, too busy with trying to figure out everything that was going on with the Akatsuki and Black Zetsu. And the last time they went somewhere together was after they had first gotten married. Which they had spent the day together but had met up with Izumi and Itachi, and it had been more of a group thing than just the two of them. Embarrassed, with his cheeks beginning to redden a small bit, Obito turned away from her. "When I get back, I'd like to take you on a date. If you're okay with it." Embarrassment reaching the breaking point, Obito gritted his teeth. "This is stupid. I never should have entertained that damn girl." He thought, swearing vengeance at Yukina's little sister. He'd never go through with something like this again. It was just too damn embarrassing. Yukina was oblivious to her husband's embarrassment. "I'd love that," she replied with a smile. Obito held back the sigh in relief and left without another word. Before all that, he had things to do. Triple X. Appearing out of a spiraling void, Obito looked around to find himself on top of a high tree. In the distance, he could see the hidden mist village and slipped his hood on from the slight rain that watered the area. He leaped down onto the cold ground, ignoring the mud that stuck to his shinobi sandals, and walked to the village at pace. Before he dealt with Yarashiki, he needed more information on who exactly was running the Akatsuki and their full plan. Who knew they were collecting the bijou, but he suspected that they had something even bigger planned. It would make sense if Black Zetsu came to the past as well. He pushed those thoughts away for a bit as he stepped before the village gates. He was given entrance immediately and lead to the Mizuki's office. It wasn't a very long walk, and he had occupied himself within his thoughts, not paying much attention to his surroundings. Minutes later, he and the Mizuki were left alone on a bridge overlooking a raging river, though somehow it managed to look peaceful, in a way. Yagura was standing on the bridge, watching the river with the hand on the railing. He had been thinking about the Akatsuki and the masked man that had been controlling him. Paranoid thoughts slipped into his head. He wasn't a perfect Jinchuriki, but he had very good control over the three tails. To think that he could still be controlled despite his power was a very frightening thought. You going to speak or what? Ha! Yagura flinched back away from the ledge, surprised to see Obito had been right beside him. He calmed down when he remembered their meeting. When did you get there? Obito only stared. What wrong with you? The frown on his face was something that Obito knew was put of character for him. Controlling the man himself at a point in time, Obito knew everything about him. I was just thinking. That's all, he said after a pause. Obito considered pushing the conversation but remembered what he had come for. Time wasn't on his side right now. Have you thought of my offer from earlier? Obito questioned, turning away from the Jinchuriki to look at the raging water. I have. The Jinchuriki answered immediately, getting out of his stupor and going straight to his Kage mode. After I thought a bit more about it, I decided that I would trust you. Isabu was Uchiha no solace. But he felt himself beginning to calm down. He was in a mindscape, one Zetsu had control over. He should have expected he wouldn't be able to kill him, but his anger and frustration from running around the world had got the best of him. Kagaya coming back is not fate, and I will not allow that to happen again, Obito said. Of course you say that, but you know you have no actual way to make that illusion reality. Your reality has been decided the moment Madara manipulated you like a puppet. You're only furthering my plan by retaliating against me. The more you think you know what will happen, I do the complete opposite, something you don't expect, and you have a little breakdown in your mind. The speech he was given made Obito realize that despite the precautions he had taken, Black Zetsu was still able to spy on him and had done so. He figured out in growing frustration that Zetsu's evaluation was correct and that despite his intelligence, he had been one-upped every time he had come close to figuring something out. There was always a block that had slowed whatever momentum he gained and he felt like giving up. The Uchiha felt himself punched away and fell onto the ground in a heap. He looked up slowly, regaining himself before a silent gasp escaped his mouth. Before him stood Minato Namikaze. He smiled at the Uchiha, holding out a hand for him to grab. "Sorry for the rough entrance, Obito. It was the only way to get through. Oomph, I think the fool deserves. I've never seen a more pathetic Uchiha." Fugaku Uchiha stepped from behind the fourth and gave Obito a superior stare, which wasn't all that surprising. He was a top-class Uchiha after all. "Minato-sensei, Fugaku." Obito muttered in shock. "Get up already. You're a Uchiha, fool." The words had shook the surprise out of the Uchiha and he got to his feet to look at the two, still in utter shock. Their surroundings had even changed, with a bright azure sky replacing the calming lake. It looked similar to the place Naruto had gotten through to him. "What's going on? How are you two here?" The better question should be is, why didn't you tell me you were from the past, Obito? Minato said, frowning. "I thought we could trust each other more than that." "Sensei. Of course I understand why you'd be wary of me, but taking on a burden this big all by yourself is what got you into this mess in the first place," Fugaku said, crossing his arms. "He's right, Obito. I believe you should trust in your comrades more. But Kagaya, she's too strong for any of them to handle. She dash. Can you beat her?" Fugaku asked, cutting the other Uchiha off. The uncertain look in the Uchiha's face told him before he could say anything. "Now I can see your plan. If you can't beat her, then you'll prevent her from appearing. But the mastermind behind that is someone beyond your reach, correct? TCH, how do you both know all this?" Obito yelled out, his earlier frustration and confusion only growing. "The Sage of Six Paths informed us, in case you would stumble on your path." Minato informed him, and the Uchiha's eye widened as he felt a nauseous feeling pass over him. He knew he cared for Minato, but Fugaku had been someone he grew to care for ever since he began training Itachi. The man himself made it a slow process, but it nevertheless happened over the years. And the fact that these two know of his past deeds as the world's supposed messiah. "Calm yourself, boy," Fugaku commanded, seeing his state, while Minato looked worried and grabbed his shoulder in comfort. "We understand what you did and why. The fact that you are trying your hardest to rectify your mistakes makes up for it. Stop living in the past. Obito, I want you to know that it's okay. We know that you are only trying to keep things in order. Our deaths are not on your hands," Minato said. "That said, you have a lot of work to do. And first on your list is to never give up." Fugaku coolly closed his eyes. As Minato said, "Don't give up in the middle of your mission, it's unbecoming of a Uchiha, and I won't let you sully our name with your nonsense." "Then what do you expect me to do?" Obito asked, giving off a defensive tone. I expect you to fight." Fugaku interrupted once more with a stone-cold glare. "And I expect you to figure out a way to win. We Uchiha never lose, and when we do we never give up." The words lifted the Uchiha's spirit. He felt as if he could actually figure something out if someone like Fugaku was telling him this. Minato gave the man a smile and ruffled his hair like he used to do when Obito was a child. "Never give up, Obito, and stick with any decision you make until the very end." The fourth Hokage ceased his movements and took a step back, the bright smile never leaving his face. "We'll be here to help you. And I want you to know that everyone else is behind you, so you don't have to fight these threats all alone." Obito blinked, finding himself back in the river like mind that belonged to Yagura and Black Zetsu nowhere to be seen. He looked at his hand before bringing it to his chest, feeling the powerful thumping that didn't seem like it would slow anytime soon. He felt both a sense of calm and empowerment at the words from both his sensei and Fugaku. He clenched his hand into a tight fist. If this Urashiki was just as big of a threat as Kagaya, then all he would have to do would be to fight him to test his limitations and break past them. He'd worry of the Akatsuki and such later when more time would be available. Now that he had what he needed, it was time for him to leave. Triple X. Sasuke slowly rose to his feet, the pain running through his body making it an entire process. He looked over at the looming form of Tayuya using the full power of the first form of her curse mark. He felt himself revolted and, at the same time, intrigued at the density and weight of the chakra, but he refused to use it. He wanted power, to be strong, but did not want that power to come from some handout. He wanted to earn the power all on his own. Tayuya gave a deadly smirk. If you won't come, then I'll come at you. Before the Uchiha knew it, she was right in front of him, aiming a kick. He quickly activated his Sharingan and smoothly sidestepped the attack, only to later fall victim of a sharp knee that landed square in his gut with enough force to crack a boulder. He felt himself heave, before he was sent back into a tree with force with a punch to his face. He groaned loudly, holding his excruciating face in his hands as he writhed in pain on the ground. Tayuya walked up before him. Is that all you got, weakling? Now I see how your clan was wiped out so easily. Despite the pain, Sasuke was quick onto his feet, face holding killing intent. Don't speak of my clan! He yelled, managing to catch her off guard with an upwards kick to her chin, sending her into the air before following after her. Lion's Barrage. He slammed her back to the ground with a kick in the abdomen, but it did nothing to her. He crouched on his knees and panted heavily as she got up with barely a scratch on her. Her smirk came back full force. Is that all you have, trash? Sasuke Orochimaru cooed from the seal on Sasuke's neck. The seal glowed and burned and Sasuke held it as tight as he could at the pain. It's time for you to use my power, Sasuke. The power you desperately need. No. Sasuke groaned out, but the seal began clouding his face and covering his body. His lack of chakra to blame for lack of control. Yes, Sasuke dear. Now fight. Dark purple energy shot into the air and pushed high-pressure wind around the area, causing the trees to be almost picked up by the force of his chakra alone. Lighting sputtered in the Uchiha's hand before fully becoming the Chidori, but he was stopped when a spiderweb stuck him to the ground. That's enough, kid. Excellent. Kadamaru said with a smirk. Almost as if he was obeying, his curse mark faded and Sasuke was left confused. Did you feel that power? That's what this can do for you. And you can get even more if you take these. In his hands were pills that lay in a single bottle. If I eat those I can become even more powerful, right? Triple X. TCH, did you guys feel that? Kiba asked, just being able to calm Akamaru down from the intensity of the chakra that had just swept her through the area. He was certain that it had been Sasuke. Their group had almost made it to the location of the first fight, but he smelled that this was past that, and by a couple of miles. It's Sasuke. Shino said after converging with one of his insects. That was his chakra. At least part of it was. Then we should catch up and quick. He must be in a fight or something. Ino said. Then we need to split up. Shikamaru said suddenly, gaining everyone's attention. They looked more than confused at why he would propose such a thing. We've already figured out that more than one person kidnapped Sasuke, and I reckon it would have to be at least 4 people, as a squad would need to be sent on infiltration mission like these. Looking at this next battle could give us more insight on more of their abilities, and that'll help us when we come across them. Niji nodded. Then who do you propose would split up? Shino, Ino, Tenten, Hinata and Sakura will stay behind and check out that battlefield. The rest of us need to proceed to Sasuke. They all agreed to the plan without complications and split up into groups. Naruto remained far ahead of them all, having already accidentally skipped past the fight in order to find Sasuke. He wouldn't have the other hold him back. Naruto, stop. A deep, gruffly voice commanded. Startled, the Jinchuriki stopped on reflex, standing on a thick branch. They all agreed to the plan without complications and split up into groups. Naruto remained far ahead of them all, having already accidentally skipped past the fight in order to find Sasuke. He wouldn't have the other hold him back. "What do you want right now?" "I'm busy," Naruto said in an urgent tone, only to receive a snarl of anger from the demon fox, which only scared the teen. "Be quiet while I'm talking, Kit. I'm trying to tell you something important," the fox said, able to rein the anger in for a moment longer. He was already irritable for whatever reason, and his stubborn Jinchuriki wasn't making it any better for him. "Well, what is it?" "There's someone with a huge chakra signature heading your way. Go back with your group," the fox warned, which only served to confuse his jailer. "I'm serious, Naruto. Go back with your group," the fox roared, cutting his jailer off. Naruto muttered something the fox chose to ignore as he did as told and stopped moving to wait on his teammates. Kurama did not like that feeling he was getting. And it felt all too familiar. Minutes of bored silence later, his group had arrived and looked very unhappy. If Sakura was with them, she would be sure to give him a knock on the head for running off, though it could happen later. They had briefed Naruto on their plan after he had been berated a bit and begun moving to Sasuke's position. In all of his pouting, Naruto had forgotten to tell his teammates about why he had actually stayed back. Chapter 45. Stop here. Shino commanded his small platoon just as they were about to enter the clearing. The bug user felt something off in the area and sent one of his bugs in to see what that was. His squad behind him was totally confused, however. "Shino, what's going on?" Sakura asked, having taken a look around the clearing herself. Unsurprisingly, she hadn't seen a thing, and it only made her confused as to why he had told them to stop. Shino chose not to speak and waited patiently for the single insect that he sent out to come back to him. It landed on his finger and he communicated with it for a short bit as his teammates looked on to see what he would say. Shino nodded to himself and raised his head up as the bug was let back into his body. "There is a poison mist in the air. But I do not know what it does," he finally said. "Poison?" Ino copied with an inquisitive look. "Why is there poison in this area?" "Most likely from the fight, right?" Tenten asked, wondering what their next move would be if poison would restrict them from entering the area. "I suspect that this poison is from Rinsan, the other target of our mission." "You do?" Hinata asked meekly. "Yes." Shino nodded. "My insects have already neutralized the poison and analyzed it. It has Konoha-based components and is a poison that is used to knock out high-level opponents." "Okay. Then what's her next move?" Ino asked. Shino lifted a single arm and released a sizable number of his insects into the air. "My insects have already spread the poison throughout both my body and themselves. If you were to allow yourselves to become temporary host for them, then you should be able to come in the poison mist without complication. If you don't want to, then you'll have to wait here." Despite the mild disgust and a high level of reluctance, they all agreed. They wanted to be able to complete part of their mission while the others were completing their own. They wanted to be able to do their part as well. Apart from the poison mist, which was no longer a problem, they hadn't seen much of anything but the natural wilderness around them. Ino had suggested that nothing had been out of the ordinary, but Shino thought better and insisted that they should continue to search, wanting to be more through. It would help if they half did their part of the mission. Nothing of excitement happened afterwards until Sakura had found a large number of trees that looked so unnaturally stacked together that it seemed unnatural. The other had all agreed to the notion, and even more so when they found a large split in the middle of it that suggested it had been cut by something. Shino looked over to Hinata and asked her to take a look at the area. She activated her Byakugan with a nod and saw the heavy chakra that had not dissipated from the inside. She knew it was too heavy and strong to be normal, as the other trees around them chakra was a lot more weaker in comparison. When she said as much, Shino had released a couple more of his insects from the inside of his body and they landed in the thick branches piled atop one another. They sucked some of its chakra before returning to Shino so he could analyze it later. In the meantime, he suggested that they all should look for more evidence and also stated that he was thinking this had been some sort of jutsu. Hinata agreed but hadn't said it, which wasn't unusual. Unfortunately, 20 more minutes of searching the clearing proved that no more could be found out, and the split group reformed once again to confirm this with one another. After confirming that they found nothing more, Shino spoke. I have found out from studying this chakra that it had to be from a Jounin level shinobi. That would make my assumption of it being a jutsu true, or at least more noteworthy. But there hasn't been anyone that could use wood for jutsu. Ino certainly didn't remember anything like that. She hadn't even heard of anything besides the 5 main elements. There has. Sakura might not be very strong, but she was very book smart and knew of a user of the rare wood style. Our past leader, the first Hokage, was able to use a rare jutsu to create trees to fight with. It had been in the many books that had talked about the past Kage she had read. Well, if that's true, then what do we even do with the information? Tenten asked. In her opinion, they had wasted time. There's no much. Shino admitted. But it could definitely help if our enemy uses this wood style. We could even potentially find a weakness, but for now let's get a move on. We can catch up with the others if we are fast. Nods all around, all of the teens were gone in blurs faster than the untrained eye could follow. Triple X. Kurama watched the outside world through his Jinchuriki in a tense silence. He felt that powerful chakra that felt out of this world and prepared himself to fight in case it was a threat. He knew it would be even more difficult since he could give nowhere nearly enough chakra to Naruto that he could give during the war. His puny body wouldn't be able to handle that much chakra all at once. The large fox's tails swung in harmony, a deadly grin showing how he was feeling at the moment. Whatever was on the way was definitely coming at Naruto, and with no sign of hesitation. A low growl escaped his mouth despite his attempts to silence himself. Relative silence between the 5 young shinobi were only broken by the sound of rustling leaves as they leaped through trees and the sound of the wood as they jumped and landed on the branches of the big trees. In the silence, Naruto had thought about what his demon told him. Who was the someone on the way? And were they dangerous? The young Jinchuriki wasn't much of a thinker, and once it got to the point where he couldn't figure out what he wanted to do and just gave up. He'd wait to see what would happen. About 30 minutes later, Kiba had stopped them just short of a small clearing that was still very densely populated with vegetation. He could smell a total of 4 people before them and sensed something that was not right in the area. Once he said this, Niji immediately activated his Byakugan to see what was beyond them, only to see 3 sound ninjas sitting in a formation in what looked like deep concentration. Surprisingly, dark purple chakra surrounded them, and in the middle of the 3 was a special container that seemed to be what was causing the dark chakra to surface, but the Hyuga could not see its contents. When he said as much, Naruto reacted well, like Naruto would. That's gotta be Sasuke in that box thing. He hissed, attempting to leap from there, covering only for Niji and Shikamaru to pull him back. Both the teens have Naruto a disapproving look, but it hadn't seemed to get through the Jinchuriki, who had been entirely focused on getting his friend. He didn't understand that he was putting his comrades in danger. Naruto, you are not leaving again. You could get us all killed rushing in like that. Shikamaru reprimanded. He was slightly starting to regret his decision to bring Naruto along with them. He was becoming more of a hindrance than help, on they were already at the disadvantage. It might have been harsh, but it certainly wasn't wrong. Choji put a hand on Naruto's shoulder when he looked like he wouldn't comply. Just listen to Shikamaru. He was being uncharacteristically serious, which Naruto hadn't seen from him. It was startling enough to calm him down enough for the others to start releasing him for a bit before doing so completely. He seemed he would remain calm. Fine. He pouted, crossing his arms. He would stay put, for now. Guys, they're done with whatever they were doing down there. Look. Kiba said. He had chosen to watch their targets instead of helping calm down Naruto in the case they had heard the loud blonde and decided to try and sneak up on him. Akamaru yipped his own report from inside his jacket, but no one would understand but him. All teens looked down to see that Kiba was right and they were done and looked prepared to leave. Shikamaru was on it immediately, ordering Choji to charge at them for a distraction, and Naruto used shadow clones to surround the area so ensure none escaped. Finally done with this shit. Tayuya muttered, stretching her neck out so it would stop hurting. They had to be there extra long because the fatso was still away. Now she was more irritable than usual. It had already been decided that Kadamaru would be lugging the container around while they waited for Sasuke's body to accumulate the curse mark. The spider user lifted it off the ground and used his extra arms to hold it in place on his back. Oomph, well, we're done, so stop complaining. All we gotta do now is bring him back to Lord Orochimaru and it'll all be over. That's what you think? Choji yelled, surprising the members is the sound for as he jumped through the dense trees, holding a seal in place. Ninja Art, Expansion Jutsu. The genin's body expanded into a large ball at the shock of the other before he attacked. Human Boulder. Tucking in his head, arms, and legs, the Akimichi began spinning rapidly, the weight of his body sending him down into the ground. Before he could hit anyone, they were able to jump away because of his speed. Skidding along the ground, the three were immediately surrounded by multiple versions of Naruto, making escape nearly impossible. They were already trying to figure out what jutsu this was and how they would escape, which made them fail to see the fast-moving shadow zigzagging along the ground to avoid the clones before snagging its target. That being Kadamaru. His body suddenly was unable to control itself, and the spider user nearly freaked out as he glanced down to see a long shadow that was latched onto his. He followed the shadow up its roots to see Shikamaru crouched low on the ground and holding a symbol with Neji beside him. When the boy nodded his head, two more Konoha ninja jumped out of the brush and landed beside his other two teammates. Kiba and Akamaru beside Sakan, who was closer to him, and Choji beside Tayuya. None of you move. Shikamaru commanded, strengthening his jutsu. If you do, I'll strangle him to death. His words made Tayuya snarl, but neither she nor Sakan moved. When the Chunin confined this, he slowly stood up and began backing up, causing the sound ninja to move forward. His plan was simple. He'd bring the guy to Neji for him to be disabled and Sasuke to be taken. All the while his teammates would be stuck. Shikamaru kept his pace steady and kept his eyes on the teammates. If they moved, he would have to end the guy, so if they were able to get Sasuke back, then they wouldn't have another teammate, at the very least. Neji unleashed his Byakugan silently, intent on making sure that none of them would move in the slightest. Their prize was halfway towards Neji when Yukon suddenly detached from his twin, instantly surprising all of the other shinobi when he leaped at Shikamaru. Kiba leaped away as well, hot on his trail, but would not be fast enough to make it. He yelled that out, but it was too late as the fast sound ninja had reached Shikamaru. He was about to strike when Neji stepped in front of him with his arm covered in chakra, using the palm of his hand to push away the twin. It was successful and the twin reared away in pain as a vital chakra point had been hit. Shadow Strangle Jutsu. His technique changed. Still binding Kadamaru, the shadow changed shape and began ascending his leg. The shape formed into a large hand that went around his neck and applied tremendous force. It wasn't enough that it would kill him, that wasn't the Nara's intent to begin with, but it would be enough to knock him unconscious. He couldn't go through with the threat he gave out. He wasn't a killer. As this happened, Choji was glaring at Tayuya. Don't even try it. She only took his warning with a smirk, not believing him to be of any threat to her. Okay, fatso. Her usual line of insults had caused Choji anger immediately. With a war cry of a yell, he was charging at her at full speed, his brain not beyond thinking of beating up the one who would insult his weight. Unfortunately, he was not fast enough that he would be able to enact this and only played into her hands. She jumped over the genin and pulled out her demonic flute with ease. She hadn't been thinking of the dozens of clones around her who had jumped after her to make sure she would escape. While significantly faster than Choji, she was still able to dodge around some and hit others as she readied herself to play her demonic instrument. Gravity took hold of her and she began to descend back to the ground, making it hard to maneuver in the air, which one clone took advantage of. He was able to hook both his arms around her abdomen from behind, while other clones tried to follow his example. Damn it! She gritted out, trying to pry the little bastard off while her eyes tried to follow all of the clones jumping at her all at once. She would have been hit if not for a couple of huge spider webs that had caught a number of clones with its sticky, white substance. Stronger ones were able to soar and stick to trees, trapping the clones, while others only took the clones out of the air and pushed them down onto the ground. Because of the chaos beneath them, the shadow clone had gotten distracted and his grip loosened, allowing Tayuya to break free and kick the clone in the face, watching as it dispersed in a poof. She turned to her teammate in surprise and saw him free of his restraints. She landed on a tree and saw that the kid that had been binding him was on the ground, looking to be in pain, while Sakan stood over him. He must have used the chaos around him to sneak over to the Nara and free Kadamaru from his restraints. Sakan chuckled, looking at Shikamaru clutching his head. He flexed his hands in delight of his strength. Sorry about that. Guess my strength's a bit much for you weaklings. Tunneling Fong. Spinning rapidly at high speeds, Kiba almost slammed into Sakan with one of his weaker techniques, as he had no time to cooperate properly with Akamaru. Sakan landed beside his brother, who was in a stare down with Niji before he had arrived. He turned to him. Sorry for the wait. His brother only nodded and they began fusing together. All the while Niji was looking at their chakra networks. They both had their own separate networks, but they seemed to fuse together just as their bodies had. His eyes only could narrow. What kind of jutsu was that? Rasengan. Naruto yelled as he and a clone of his spared through the air, aiming his signature technique at Kadamaru. But he had already seen the blonde, as subtly was not his forte. A large spider web shot out of Kadamaru's mouth and trapped Naruto and his clone to a tree before his Rasengan exploded from being disrupted. The explosion caused Naruto's whole sleeve to be blown off and his clone to disappear, leaving him on the ground in pain. His remaining shadow clones popped away, leaving the small clearing clear. Damn, our plan is falling apart. Kiba muttered, holding Shikamaru up with his arm around him. Only him, Choji, and Niji could fight at the moment, effectively making the numbers a fair 3-on-3. How pitiful. Kadamaru remarked, slamming the case holding Sasuke on the ground none too gently. Are these the weaklings the Leaf sent after us? I think so. Tayuya said, landing a couple of meters away from her partner with a smirk. These guys were easy pickings compared to the others that had faced. Her curse mark awakened almost silently and spread across her face in a jagged pattern. She began to play her flute, playing the exact notes to have her desired effect. Choji was too slow to realize what she was doing, and his teammates were none the wiser as well. It only worked to his disadvantage, allowing him to be captured in a genjutsu. Finding himself strewn up by ropes in a barren area, the genin panicked. It only rose when he watched his arm begin to melt before his eyes. He screamed loudly in the genjutsu but was much more meager outside of it, only falling to the ground unconscious. She used genjutsu from sound. Niji realized. His Byakugan had seen it all, specifically the disrupt in Choji's chakra flow. The fact that it was sound-based was especially troubling. His eyes widened in surprise when a smoke bomb was thrown at their feet and exploded outwards, sending an abundance of obscuring smoke all around Tayuya and Kadamaru. He found out quickly that it had been Kiba who had thrown him it and kept his eyes on Sakan so he would not be able to help his partners in whatever Kiba had planned. Let's go, Akamaru! Kiba yelled and his companion barked happily with a readied body. Simultaneously they spun rapidly, fast enough to create a whirlwind, and leaped into the smoke. In complete sync, the two broke apart the ground with the speed and power of the technique as they pulverized the surprised and unprepared duo. The smoke was only helping them. When Sakan found that his teammates were actually getting hit by the technique, he tried to run over and help, but Niji had noticed even the slightest movement and was in front of him before he could barely move a couple of meters. He would have hit the sound ninja, but he was able to jump away in time and, to Niji's utter surprise, split from each other with Yukon soaring through the air in order to break up Kiba and Akamaru's attack. The two were incredibly fast and the sound ninja was only focusing on how he would break it up, effectively giving him something close to what essentially was tunnel vision. It made for a bad combo when two Uzumakis stepped in his path before he could react in time. Rasengan. Unlike last time, his technique slammed into the sound ninja, ripping through his clothes and staining his abdomen a nasty shade of green. It was so strong that it sent him spiraling BF out of control into a tree in the distance as the Uzumaki fell to the ground in utter exhaustion. It had taken his all to catch up to the speed of him, and he was lucky for his healing factor as it would clear that up in no time. Back in the dust cloud, Kiba had finished off his attack and skidded along the ground to a safe distance as his pup had before him. He watched dust clear a bit after the assault had ended, only to find Kadamaru over Tayuya and a gold-like plate over his body that looked incredibly damaged, to the point in fact that parts of it begun to crumble off the ninja as he panted heavily. Despite being on the floor, Tayuya had gotten up fast and ran at Akamaru before sending into a tree harshly with a well-aimed kick to its ribs. Akamaru! Kiba yelled and leaped to try and defend, only to get tangled in a large web created by Kadamaru. Like his dog, he was slammed harshly into a tree and nearly passed out from the immense pain that coursed through his ribs. He felt his body giving out on him. Die, trash! Kadamaru yelled, launching a golden-colored spear that came from his body at Kiba. It would have struck if Niji hadn't come to his defense, jumping high into the air and kicking it away. As he did that, Naruto had gotten back up and prepared to use another attack, but Niji landed beside him and grasped his shoulder to pull him back. Whispering, the prodigy spoke calmly. We need to retreat. They've outmatched us. Naruto was quick to protest on what he thought the Hyuga was implying. But we can't leave the others. I'm not saying that. The Hyuga was quick to deny and squeezed the blonde's shoulder to silently tell him to lower his voice. He doubted it would work though. My plan was for you to use your shadow clones to both cover us and distract our enemies as well as pick up our comrades. Naruto picked on quickly and nodded before turning back to his opponents and, using his signature hand sign, summoned 500 clones of himself. Almost all of them began swarming their opponents, and Niji and the real Naruto used the distraction to lead the few shadow clones that would be following them with their teammates in tow. Niji had to help cut the spider web, noticing how chakra ran through it. Grabbing Akamaru was fairly easy because of the shadow clones that distracted the trio of warriors. The plan was successful, and they were able to escape with everyone alive and hadn't chosen to stop until they meet with the rest of their team. To say they were shocked at the state they'd been beaten was an understatement, but Niji chose not to explain to them until they gained more distance away from those sound ninja. He said as much, and the others agreed after a bit of talk amongst themselves. Minutes later, the group found themselves dead in the forest floor, hidden by dense vegetation. The shadow clones carrying Shikamaru, Choji, and Kiba dispersed when they were placed along the ground, and Hinata had begun to use her Byakugan to scan for injuries. Nothing showed except for surface-level damage, and Ino and Sakura began to bandage the boys up while Niji explained them what happened, their plan, and all of the abilities their opposition displayed. He was able to catch each and every one of them with the power of his Byakugan. That's trouble. Shino muttered. It seemed that their task just got much harder. Well, what do we do now? Tenten asked with a frown, watching as her teammates were being wrapped up. We wait until they can come with us. We can't leave anyone this time if we could not handle them with almost double their numbers. Niji said matter-of-factly, and he was agreed with. It wouldn't do good if some of their strongest couldn't help them fight. When he heard someone land somewhere near them, he looked up to see a deadly pale guy who only sent a large grin at them. It had caused him to tense, but he couldn't keep his eyes off the man's face when he realized he had a Byakugan. How? It had caused him to tense, but he couldn't keep his eyes off the XXX. Kakashi walked through one of the corridors of the underground facility housing the hospital until the destroyed building was remade. Following him was Shikaku, who had arrived unexpectedly and separately from what the copy ninja could tell. Although for what reason, he didn't know. He was content on finding out later, or not at all, as the literature he was reading was far more important at the time. But he was glad to be down here as he managed to give Guy the slip. He decided he would check on Anko, specifically her seal, to see if everything was alright and stable. She had been unconscious during the meeting they had before. When Kakashi noticed that Shikaku was going in his same direction, he decided to close his book. He was nearing his destination anyway. Are you going to check on Anko, or do you just happen to go in the same direction as me? Going to see Anko for something important. He answered lazily, his body slouching. He could finally relax after playing Kage for a bit. It was definitely something he would take full advantage of. Kakashi only hummed and they walked in silence before they entered the door to her room. They saw that she was up on her feet and just about to slip a shirt over her bra but paused when the two entered the room. First she looked at Kakashi, then at Shikaku before smirking and lifting the shirt a little bit above her cleavage. I didn't know you two wanted to sneak a pic so bad. She grinned in amusement when they gave her a deadpan look. You shouldn't just waltzed into a girl's room. You might get her all hot and bothered. She laughed. Alright, that's enough teasing us. Kakashi said, closing the door behind them before she slipped on her shirt with the same amount of amusement on her face. I was going to ask how you were doing, but you look fine to me. Fine enough to make jokes. Yeah, I'm fine. She replied, searching through her tote clothes for all of her things. Is that all you two came for? That's not why I came, but I'm glad to see you in good health, because I have something to tell you. Shikaku reached behind him and pulled out a new flak jacket. You've been officially promoted to a Jounin Anko. Good work on your last assignment. Stunned, the snake user could only blink as involuntary tears welled in her eyes. But my status dash. I know. You've been halted from becoming a Jounin because of the circumstances that surrounded Orochimaru when he left the village. It was because of the mistrust or downright hatred a lot of the Jounin and civilians had for you that stopped the third from giving you the promotion even he thought you deserved. With your last assignment, you've proven where your loyalties stand, and despite not having mastery of the curse mark, I was able to pull some strings. When the Nara frowned at the end, Kakashi had already knew what those strings were. He offered to do Tsunade's paperwork. So, I don't have to go through the whole process of dash. Nope. Consider it a field promotion. The Nara said, but surprise ran through him when she ran up to hug him. Don't misunderstand this. She muttered into his clothes. I'm simply just giving my thanks is all. When she stepped away from him, he resigned himself to telling her the bad news, well, to her anyway. But in order for me to get this through past the council, who still have low opinion on you, I had to promise them something. Anko grew a bit worried and her eyes narrowed. And what's that? The Nara only looked to the side. Well, you have to have a Genin team. And your first member will be the kid we got from Danzo. So you're telling me I have to babysit a brat? Her voice dipped into an unadulterated rage. And from Danzo no less? Yes. Needless to say, Kakashi was dragged into her rage and both of them were hit and kicked before being kicked out of the room where nurses and doctors from other rooms were just staring at them. Kakashi rubbed his head where Anko had gotten a pretty good hit on and sighed. Why do I always get dragged into things? I don't know. Shikaka said, panting slightly. Triple X. Hood obscuring her face and head held low, Sarada trudged through the village at an uneven pace. Sometimes fast, sometimes slow. The Uchiha could never really keep it consistent enough for someone to key out just how fast she was going. But she knew where she was headed. She could feel the Mangekyo cursing her, feeling her with malice and hatred, and it made her irritable. She could no longer cry about her father's death, not when the anger coursing through her vein filled her thoughts with only vile actions, and right now, she didn't trust herself not to go through with them. But she wasn't surprised, she knew what was happening. This was the curse of hatred. Her father had warned her about it when her Mangekyo first awakened because of how and why it awoken. He had told her what it would do, but also said that there was no way for it to be lifted, other than with love. With Boruto and Mitsuki around her, times were always better, but she didn't want them around her right now. Not in fear she would hurt them, but in fear of looking too vulnerable in front of them. Her thoughts alleviated, and she could feel the eyes on her as well as the small whispers of what was no doubt rumors and speculation as she went through the large gates of the largely abandoned district. Minutes passed and she had finally reached the destination she had been looking for, her father's old home. From the future, it had been the only building that hadn't been remolded, and so she knew where she was going. She opened the door and had to hold in a wheeze when dust clouded her nose and eyes. It seemed no one had come in here for a very long time to actually clean up. She ignored it in favor of continuing and only had to deal with the mild discomfort of having the back of her mouth burn slightly because of the dust. She walked to the mat that hid the Uchiha's secret meeting place and lifted it. She looked inside but could only see the darkness staring back at her. Silently, she made her way inside. Once inside, she found a torch along the wall that she hadn't seen before and decided that it had been a genjutsu at the entrance that would discourage people from entering such a dark area. She walked up to the Uchiha stone tablet and began to read, completely oblivious to the dark figure in the shadows watching her. Chapter 46. Who the hell is that guy? Naruto asked with bated breath as the hairs on his skin stuck up as if they were alive. He was beginning to feel goosebumps all around his body at the sight of this strange-looking man before him. His teammates weren't looking any better, even Shino felt unnerved. Naruto, get away from him. He's dangerous. Kurama yelled, shaking his Jinchuriki from his stupor. This was an Otsutsuki no doubt, and the why he was here wasn't what he was focused on at the moment. He knew that Naruto was nowhere near the strength where he would be able to lend enough chakra to defeat this foe. His Jinchuriki was stubborn, however. Who the hell are you? Naruto yelled out, fist balled and clenched before him. But the man before him only kept up a grin. He lifted a hand and everyone below him tensed. He could only smirk at their reaction. Who is that guy? Sakura murmured, fear welling inside her. Her whole body was giving her danger signals, telling her to run, but like everyone else she remained rooted in place. The fear of what she would look like to the others far outweighing the fear she had. For now, at least. A red fishing rod made of entirely of chakra materialized in his hand and he took a single step forward. I suppose you won't give me what I want without a fight. His words were enough to send chills down the spines of everyone, but composure was kept up quite well, even by weaker members of the large team. Naruto's eyes widened when the Nine Tails chakra began invading his system. A massive amount of chakra began leaking from the Jinchuriki before it bursted out all at once, almost strong enough to knock everyone around him to their feet. They were currently looking at him with various forms of shocks, and even he wondered what was going on. Kurama knew his Jinchuriki would not be running away, despite his warning. He decided to give Naruto as much as chakra as his body could handle at the moment so Kurama would be able to help him on the inside. The seal was still strong, which made it impossible for him to take over his host to fight for him. This was the best he could do for now. Naruto gave a loud roar as his body was being powered by one tail of the Kyuubi's chakra. It's just like that time. Neji thought, realizing what this form was from what he was seeing. It was even more powerful than when they had clashed. Without warning, Naruto leaped off the tree with enough speed and force to throw the others to the ground as he speeded towards the strange-looking man before him. He only smirked when Naruto had almost got close enough to bite him, his pole coming in between the two. Naruto glared intensely as his newly grown fangs wore on the pole. Such good chakra. I'll be taking it now. Flicking his wrist, he took almost all of Naruto's chakra he had been given in an instant, as well as they boy's own chakra. He felt unconscious almost immediately and would have fallen if the red chakra pole hadn't been swung to catch him. It wrapped around him to keep him safe from falling to the ground. Naruto! Sakura shrieked, seeing her teammate in danger. Neji was the first to get out of his stupor and rushed to save Naruto, but he was pulled away from him and Neji had to block an oncoming kick that would have likely taken him out of commission. He was sent skidding along the ground and noticed that his attack had awoken some of his team members. Tenten, Shino, and Hinata rushed in before he followed suit. Urashiki smirked as he set Naruto down on a branch to keep him away from the battle. I suppose I could play with you fools a bit. He swiped his pole to the side, smacking kunai and shuriken that was aimed at him by Tenten away before a swarm of bugs flew for him. He gathered chakra from what he stole from Naruto and sent it in a wave, completely destroying the insects. Shino looked on in surprise, but it didn't last long as he saw Tenten switch tactics. She saw that long range would not work and this time came prepared. She jumped high into the air and opened a scroll from her pocket. As it swirled around her, she completed various hand signs and the paper began to glow. "Check this out!" she yelled before a puff of smoke erupting from the scroll clouded her form. When it disappeared, she had a bow staff in her hand, but it wasn't ordinary. "This is the weapon I created myself, the Akibara." The weapon allowed her to change it into whatever weapon she wanted as long as she drew her chakra into its seal. Unfortunately, it could only transform into 3 weapons because of how new it was. She was also working on a mechanism that would hold chakra in it for even more power, but it was still a work in progress. In fact, it would be a while until she got it down. Simultaneously, Niji, Tenten, and Hinata began their assault on Yurashiki, who still had a confident smirk plastered on his face. Hinata jumped in first, her usual meek personality thrown to the wayside at seeing Naruto hurt. She threw out a palm which was deflected by Yurashiki's pole. She was undeterred, but that proved meaningless when the pole extended and swiveled to her head. She was able to block it just in time with her forearm, but the force pushed her off balance, giving the being time to counter by kicking her away. He'd get no break when Tenten had leaped high before him and brought her staff down, but he was able to react with his fishpole and blocked her attack. Niji jumped behind the large branch they were fighting on, aiming to strike from behind. Yurashiki pushed the kunoichi away from him, but his pole latched onto her and he whipped her around at Niji. Niji was surprised at the speed but was able to react using his arms to push away from Tenten when she was close enough, causing him to spin in the air, but he stopped himself with the bulk of the tree and used his foot to push off it, still rushing forward. "You're spunky. I like that," Yurashiki commented, wearing through the genin's attacks as Niji finally rushed him. In his weakened state, Niji was able to keep up with him and dodge some of his attacks, which put the two in a deadlock as they both scrambled for an opening on the other. "Sakura, wake up!" Ino yelled and Sakura jumped, surprised, and turned to her teammate. "We have to save Naruto. Come on!" Ino had realized quickly that they would only get in the way, so she decided they would try and get Naruto. Sakura followed after her, but Yurashiki had sensed them and swiveled his pole around to them. A loud crash sounded when the pole smashed into Ino, sending her to the forest floor. "Ino!" Sakura yelled in a panic before the pole began on her, but Hinata jumped in front of her and kicked out it away. She yelled in pain, but was able to collect herself and landed safely on a branch. She gritted her teeth as she gripped her aching foot before Sakura landed beside her, worried. "Hinata! Are you okay?" I am fine. Jay, just don't touch that thing," Hinata warned. Niji had seen this since they were in the range of his Byakugan and mentally told himself to not get him by the pole. Unfortunately for him, Yurashiki was making that hard. They clashed forearms, but Niji was overpowered quickly and he backflipped away to avoid a swift kick before jumping up over the Otsutsuki's body to send one of his own. It was blocked easily, but it allowed Niji to pull out 2 kunai, throwing one when he landed back on the ground. Yurashiki only inclined his head with a smirk and dodged the attack, but Niji had anticipated it and had already thrown his other kunai so fast that it was already inches away from hitting the being. He was faster, however, and was able to duck, but had played right into Niji's hand. A trigram symbol appeared along the ground and Niji lowered his stance. "It's time." "Oh no, you don't." Yurashiki was about to use the rest of Naruto's chakra to defend himself, but his arms fell limply to his sides and he could no longer feel them. He looked in a panic only to find dozens of insects on his arms. "I was able to use the poison I got from the mist and use my bugs to turn it into a liquid using their bodies as a host. I expected it to knock you out completely, but I suppose this will do," Shino explained. 8 trigrams, 64 palms. Niji's ultimate offensive technique rendered Yurashiki's chakra points completely shut down. To his credit, and the surprise of the others, Yurashiki remained on his feet, but it looked like damage had been done. "Heh, you brat." He managed out, trying to keep the lurching in his stomach from making him throw his food up. This boy was nothing short of impressive. "I get it now. I thought that was what you had." In an instant the man looked to be right back to normal, only smirking. The others couldn't even think how before veins stretched beyond his eyes and he glared back at Niji. "Allow me to play along. The Byakugan." Niji observed, surprised. But how? We can't focus on that. Tenten told him, landing beside him. We have to focus on winning. What she said seemed to resonate with him and he corrected his stance, ignoring the other glee the man seemed to display at the action. Shino landed on the other side of him as Sakura and Hinata looked on from a distance. Well, Yurashiki spat out impatiently, seeing as they hadn't moved yet. Come at me. I'm waiting. They all instantly charged at him, though Shino stayed a few meters behind his teammate while Niji took up the front since he was much faster than his teammate Tenten. Niji nodded at her before leaping up high and aiming his spinning kick, which was blocked despite his increased speed. Niji grinned and leaped off the Otsutsuki as Tenten threw in kunai with an explosive tag attached to it. He grabbed it midair but before he could throw it back at the girl, she created a seal and it exploded in his face. Seconds after explosion Niji pressed through the smoke. He's still not dead. He called out beyond it, having already seen the Celestial being alive and well in the smoke thanks entirely to his Byakugan. He was much too slow to keep up with the Otsutsuki as he suddenly disappeared from not Niji's vision and nearly 360-degree range in an instant. Despite himself, he panicked. Where could he have gone? Up there. Shino said, meters away from Niji as his insect soared to the sky where the man was flying. Shino hadn't even tried to question it. It would do no good after all. Yurashiki only looked amused, not the least worried about the little bugs. These little things again? Your little shtick is getting old, you know. He drew power from what he had gained from Naruto and shot it into a beam, once more destroying his insects. Shino was beginning to get angry but one couldn't tell because most of his face was covered. Was that a good thing or a bad thing was left up to one's own interpretation. Niji was more composed than his counterpart as he jumped out of the smoke, though a bit of his concern showed if you knew him well enough. He's out of my range, he told Tenten and Shino. The gentle fist was only for close-range taijutsu and while there were techniques that had a bit more range than that, he had not been able to master them for any practical use. And now he saw that his normal taijutsu would not be enough if this man could fly way beyond the tree line. Yurashiki chuckled at their futile attempts and shut off his Byakugan to give his strained chakra some rest. Hee, while this was fun and all, I do have somewhere to be. And I'll be taking my prize with me. Before any of them could move, his chakra fishing rod caught Naruto and threw him for the Otsutsuki to catch. Without another word, he was gone. The atmosphere around them turned deadly silent, no one daring to talk as the despair, anguish, and a whole slew of other emotions befell all the remaining shinobi still conscious. Had they really failed? Like that? And Naruto-kun. Hinata muttered, tears beginning to run down her small face. He was gone like that. Tenten began gritting her teeth in annoyance. He could do that from the beginning, couldn't he? There's no doubt. Niji answered, feeling rage seep into his form but able to rein the foreign emotion in. He was simply playing with us. Don't panic, Shino said abruptly, stepping before the group. I have a tracker on Naruto. We'll be able to find him that way no matter wherever he was taken. The mood lifted and everyone turned to him. That gave them hope. But first we need to get the others to safety until they wake up. We need to re-strategize and regroup. It was the most logical at the moment. But what about Naruto? Sakura asked, unconvinced. That man could take him too far away for us to do anything while we're on this mission. Then our choices are simple, Niji said, closing his eyes in resignment. We either leave with what we have now and potentially get our friends killed if those sound ninja come this way to finish them off, we wait till the others wake up before heading to get Naruto and abandon both our mission and Sasuke, or we could split our groups up and potentially get one group or both killed because of our lack of manpower. Those were the choices available to the genin, all not without their own consequences. It had taken a while for anyone to answer but eventually Shino spoke up and it seemed the other would agree to his word, since he was the second smartest right behind Shikamaru. I've decided to. XXX. Guys, I'm in trouble. Kurama barely admitted having dragged all his siblings into their shared mindscape. Surprisingly, even the Four Tails was able to come, showing that he hadn't been sealed yet. But that was a given. The One Tails had to be first, followed by the others. Shikako gave a rambunctious laugh. You really are saying that? How stupid. That's not nice. Matatabi said pointedly. He looks to be serious. What's wrong? Yuki asked, getting right to the point and ignoring his siblings. It's bad. An Otsutsuki had captured Naruto and I can't help because of his weak body and the strong seal keeping me back. That is bad. Matatabi said. But none of them could help and she was sure even he knew that. Why haven't you contacted Obito? He's the only one that can help you, you know that. Kurama only grunted angrily. I don't need that Uchiha brat to think that I need to rely on him. He might be stronger than me, but I'm still the nine-tailed demon fox. I need help from no one. Shikako snickered. Yet you called us here. His comment gained him a glare from both Kurama and Matatabi. Son Goku only rolled his eyes at their antics. Anyway, Yuki said. You're going to have to stop being stubborn or something bad could happen to Naruto. You wouldn't want that now, would you? His implication only made the Kyuubi snarl. But he said nothing and accepted his fate, leaving the mindscape. They were all so annoying anyway. When he was by himself it took him a while to open the connection between him and that Uchiha. He was still one of the only ones who really didn't like Obito. No, it was more like he hated him. Once he established the connection he spoke, anger still clear in his voice. Obito, I need you to come to my location now. He was demanding more than asking. For what? The Uchiha questioned on the other end, clearly not understanding the urgency of the situation. To his warped mind though, the Uchiha didn't care. Just get here, now. With a roar of anger he cut the communication before he could become even more angry. If that were possible. Damn insufferable Uchiha. Triple X. Obito stood straighter at the loud scream that nearly sent his nervous system into overload. It was that loud and wasn't exaggerating at all. He looked more annoyed than anything though. What was that all about? He couldn't help but ask. The grumpy fox was more annoying than usual, but he sounded serious. Obito's Sharingan flash and he left Yagura's mindscape, feeling better from the stress being relieved off his eyes, if only a little. Yagura woke up with a gasp and rubbed his head, trying to relieve the dull ache. Obito looked away. I have something to do. Sorry for the abrupt ending. He began to walk away when Yagura stopped him. Wait. I need to know what you found. He said in his serious tone. This not only affects your village but mine as well. This could even drag the 5 great nations into a Kage summit. It's Madara. He lied after a long pause, never bothering to turn around. Madara Uchiha from the elder days. No way. He muttered in disbelief and Obito wondered how he was going to react when his actual identity would be found. Obito knew that was not Madara for the simple fact that he killed him. I have to get going. If I need you I'll contact you. He used his Mangekyo to teleport himself, barely hearing the Kage telling him he was welcome at any time. Triple X. What is that chakra? Rin couldn't help but wonder, stopping on a tall tree to observe anything in the distance. Beside her both Kabuto and Yamato were tied up as she had just wrote a note for backup and slipped it onto a messenger bird. It would only take a couple of hours until then, so she decided to wait, and fortunately for her none of her prisoners had woken. Rin. A voice spoke behind her. She hadn't expected it and shrieked, nearly falling off the tree. She would have if the person hadn't grabbed the back of her clothes. Calm down. It's only me, Rin. She was pulled up back into the tree and turned around to see her teammate. Oh, Obito-kun? Where have you been? She couldn't help but ask, not having seen her teammate since before the Chunin exams. Busy. What's going on? Why are those two tied up? Obito asked, happy to find something to change the subject, though he was surprised to see Yamato tied up as well. Rin had difficulty answering. I'm sure you know Kabuto is Orochimaru's right-hand man. Obito nodded. But Yamato, for some reason, tried to attack me, so I was going to take him back to see a Yamanaka for the reason. There has to be something, right? Obito only hummed. While this was no doubt interesting, he had a more important thing to deal with. Naruto is in trouble. Do you know where he is? Rin looked surprised at the information, so Obito already knew the answer. Naruto's in trouble? Wait, how do you know that? Are you the backup I called for? But that wouldn't answer her first question. That was not in her note. I came of my own accord, he said simply before leaping away to avoid answering her other question. Obito, wait! She yelled out, but he hadn't listened. She readied herself to follow, but one glance at her prisoners kept her stuck to the tree. She couldn't just leave them here, more specifically Kabuto, but if she believed Obito's words, then that meant Naruto was in trouble. And she couldn't let her sensei's son get hurt. Taking another look at the ropes to make sure they were secure before following after her teammate. She needed to make sure he didn't get himself into a situation as well. Triple X. Heavy pants and hoarse coughs echoed through a long corridor, seemingly never-ending. The cause was none other than the snake Sannin himself, Orochimaru. What was akin to a deathbed? Silently a young teen walked into the room, closing the door behind her. With her, she brought in a wheelchair. How are you doing, Lord Orochimaru? Though she knew the answer, she still asked. Karen. I see. Kabuto thought all of this through. The Sannin gasped out between long coughs that caused his throat to begin to get sore. Yes, of course. The redhead responded, bringing the wheelchair to his beside and slowly taking the covers of his pale body. I was to take care of you until he returns, my lord. The Sannin continued to cough as she dragged him out of the bed one limb at a time. It took a small bit, but he was in the wheelchair and she began to wheel him out of the room through the other side, taking him to his lab. Once inside the dark lab that housed a sleeping Kimimaro, Orochimaru gave a small sigh. Seems nothing has changed at all. I suppose it's time to wake him. I need his power. The Sound Four were simply taking too long in getting Sasuke here, and now he was going to have to sacrifice one of his greatest pawns to hopefully get another. Karen, when I send him, I would like for you to guide him there. I feel things can and will become difficult. Chapter 47. Running through the dense forest was nothing short of normal for the Uchiha, but he was not unaware of the effects he was having on his surroundings. Trees were nearly blown from their roots as he sped past them. He could sense the Nine Tails chakra and had no doubt the huge beast was doing it on purpose so he would be able to find him. It would save him some time, in which he was grateful. These days weren't so lucky for him. He leaped onto a tree and began to ascend it when he sensed the chakra moving into the air. It was weird, and he didn't know what was going on. The fox hadn't explained much, or really at all. He could tell the fox would not be big on cooperating. Great. Just great. He leaped onto the tallest part of the tree and looked up to notice Naruto being flown up by a pale man in white robes. Though he couldn't see the man's face, he definitely sensed his power. And boy was he surprised, so surprised that he froze. His power was similar to Kagaya's, so similar that he began to get flashbacks of the rabbit goddess, and a trickle of sweat befell his brow. This was it, he decided. This would test if he was ready to take on Kagaya or not. He clenched his fist, the feeling in his body coming back to him. He could move again, but his target was moving away quickly. He couldn't fly, so he was sure he would not be able to catch up even if he could jump as high as the Otsutsuki could. Luckily, he had a jutsu that could fix that problem. Uchiha Flame Formation. Fingertips set ablaze by chakra, Obito slammed his hand to the ground. A barrier erected high into the sky, covering the entire forest with a blazing red. Now there's no escape. What's this? Urashiki paused midair, looking at the barrier in confusion. It faded quickly and he grinned in superiority. A barrier, huh? Do you think this can hold me back? His hook lashed out and smashed into the barrier, but it only took a second before it was set ablaze and he had to let go in case he burned himself. What? He didn't notice Obito was ascending the sky until it was too late. However, attacking the Otsutsuki was not Obito's goal right now. He activated his Mangekyo Sharingan quickly and used his long-ranged Kamui to get Naruto out of harm's way before kicking Urashiki out of the way. He began falling to the ground but was able to recover in the air and gritted his teeth in absolute fury. How was he able to take that nine-tails brat? It had to be a space-time ninjutsu. I think this can hold me back. His hook lashed out and smashed into the barrier, but it only took a second before it was set ablaze and he had to let go in case he burned himself. What? When Obito felt gravity begin to take over, he activated Kamui in his right eye and disappeared out of sight, only confirming Urashiki's observation. You're not getting away. Urashiki yelled out, racing down to the ground once he figured out that Obito could not fly, but Obito was not on Earth anymore. Inside his pocket dimension, he felt Naruto's steady heartbeat and sighed in relief. The blonde was alive and well and in better health than he previously thought. It seemed he hadn't even been with the Otsutsuki that long. Obito stood and readied himself for battle. Stay well, Naruto. A spiraling void appeared around his right eye and sucked him in. Back in the real world, Urashiki thought he was sensing Obito, but it was made apparent that it was a mistake when he came upon Rin, who was panting slightly from trying to catch her teammate. What's this? The godlike being said slyly. A woman. What, are you? Rin questioned, almost at a loss for words. Where is that red-eyed bastard? He took something I would like back. I'm right here. Obito said suddenly, appearing in a spiral in the middle of the air before rushing down and slamming the Otsutsuki in the ground with a powerful kick. Rin only gaped in surprise. Obito. Obito turned to her in an instant upon landing on the side of the tree. Rin, get out of here. That man is dangerous. I'm not leaving you here alone. Not until you explain what's going on with you. She yelled defiantly, and he considered using Kamui on her until the ground began to shake violently. Obito looked down and watched Urashiki shoot up, only able to put a single arm between them before he was launched away into the sky as the tree broke from the impact and Rin was tossed away. Obito noticed the ache in his arm and almost groaned before noticing that he was still being rushed. Angry and no doubt surprised, he formed a single hand sign with one hand. Water style, water wall. A giant wall of water protected Obito from Urashiki's next attack, splashing him into the ground with enough force to cause a massive crater and water trees and plants alike in a 2-kilometer radius. As this happened, Obito recovered midair before using the body flicker to land safely on a branch, his hood protecting him from the rain caused by his attack. Unfortunately, for him, it would not be so easy. Urashiki rose in the air once more with a smirk and Obito watched him. Is there a thing with Uchiha in cloaks that ruin my plans? I'm really considering eliminating your clan for good. A new power began to emerge from the Otsutsuki and Obito tensed violently when he saw him activate a red-colored Rinnegan with Tomo like Sasuke, unlike his own. He raised a single arm towards Obito. Let's put this to bed, shall we? Surprise overcame him when his body moved of its own accord, forcing him to Urashiki. He realized the ability of the Deva path and used Kamui at the last second to slip through the powerful being. He hadn't expected the man to expect the move somehow or simply recover from his own shock quickly and spun his newly materialized fishing rod at him. He maneuvered his body in the air and narrowly avoiding being sliced in half before performing seals upside down. Fire style, fireball jutsu. A grand fireball was fast enough to catch up to the flying Otsutsuki in no time, but he simply used the Rinnegan to absorb the jutsu, grinning. And Obito noticed that his chakra had increased tenfold and the attack wasn't all that powerful. What's going on? It's time to meet your end. Chakra in hand, Urashiki shot Obito's fireball right back at him and Obito decided to flip right side up and use his left eye's power to get rid of it almost instantly. But he was facing a problem. At this point he was losing a lot of control, being in the air so often as his opponent could fly. He needed to find a way to keep his opponent on the ground. In thought, he hadn't expected or foreseen Rin catching out of the air and safely landing on a branch. He turned to Rin with anger present on his face. "I thought I said get out of here. And I told you my answer," she said back instantly in defiance. Why was she being so stubborn? Obito certainly didn't expect this type of behavior out of her. But he had to relent. He couldn't afford to split his attention, he needed to focus on Urashiki and Urashiki alone. Anything after came second after he saved Naruto. "I'm glad I've battled you," the being said suddenly, startling the two as he floated meters away from them. "I've gained more chakra than I have ever had in such a short amount of time. Through that was all thanks to your ignorance." TCH, Obito gritted out, able to hold in a scathing remark. The bastard definitely deserved it though. It's time to end this, though. He clashed his hands together and the ground shook so violently that trees in the vicinity began collapsing and tall hills outside of the barrier began to fall and crumble. No way. Right now? Obito thought in a panic, recognizing the attack before it fully activated. But he was too late to anything to stop it. Is this ninjutsu? Rin thought in confusion, covering her face enough to see her opponent and cover from the rising debris. Planetary devastation. Large parts of the earth below them and all around began ascending in the air, following the gravitational pull of the black orb that Urashiki had brought to life. Obito immediately turned and grabbed Rin, faster than even she could react, and rushed away as even more of the earth began to rise. Even outside of Obito's barrier, but it hadn't been able to reach because of what happened when they came into contact with it. No matter how much time he tired to jump away, a piece of the earth underneath him kept rising up and he was beginning to run out of space to actually land on. He stopped on a floating piece of earth to take a look around his surroundings, letting Rin out of his grasp. "What kind of ninjutsu is this?" she asked, voicing out her thoughts with a calm face. She had trained her features so she could focus on helping her teammate. Obito remained quiet, however. He couldn't very well tell her, she was too curious for her own good and would surely ask how he acquired such information. Instead, he focused his energy on his next move. He had time to act. The floating piece of earth was fast but wouldn't be fast enough for him not to be able to think of something before it smashed into a half-finished small planetoid. Obito began performing seals in a speedy fashion, electing a small gasp from his teammate. He finished in no time and bit his finger hard enough to draw blood before spreading it across his other hand. Summoning jutsu. Immediately, a summoning seal spread it along his hand before exploding in smoke, only to reveal a giant owl. Rin looked amazed at seeing his summon as she hadn't known that he could even do such a thing as he hopped on top of it. "Hibu," Obito intoned. "I need your help." The owl only nodded dutifully, spreading its large wings in preparation for takeoff. "Rin, come on. We don't have much time," he said, reaching for her hand. "We have to strike now." He realized that she would only follow him to danger if he didn't keep her close and ignored her. Again, she was being unusually stubborn today. "Okay." She nodded and leaped onto the large owl before it flapped its giant wings and took off fast enough to leave a small sonic boom in its wake. Loose items like clothing and hair tussled in wind at the almost unbelievable speed the summon was going, as the effects of the gravitational pull-on from the attack didn't affect the creature in the slightest. Obito commanded it to circle the nearly complete planetoid, dodging anything in the way as he looked to spot Urashiki's position among the giant debris. His Sharingan finally caught him in the distance atop his creation with a satisfied smirk. In an instant, his summons speed up and aimed at Urashiki, sharp beak pointing dangerously at the smirking Otsutsuki, who had only looked amused. Obito unlocked his Mangekyo Sharingan once more and his hawk screeched like a train moving to a stop. Obito could feel the adrenaline pumping through his veins and he cared on it when he was about 90 meters away from his target. Kamui. Left eye widening from use, Obito formed a spiral right on Urashiki's head and sniped it off within an instant, surprising Urashiki as even his face had no time to morph into his surprise. But he wasn't done yet. He leaped off his summon and tore through the air in a raging attempt to reach what was left of his target's body. Chakra began flooding into his right arm and he controlled it with practiced ease. A blue ball of pure chakra eclipsed his hand before he slammed it into his target so hard that the top of the planetoid nearly broke off as both the body and Obito began descending toward the ground rapidly. His summon shifted hard in its hasty attempt to catch its summoner, causing Rin to cling to its feathers from the sharp swerve. It caught Obito without complication just as the planetoid completed, fully becoming 5x the size of one's pain could throw around. It could be seen vividly even miles away, and the same went for anyone else close enough. Triple X. It's finally over. The usual quiet Bud user commented, panting slightly as he fell to his knees in exhaustion. He had been barely able to survive being pulled into the attack, and saving the majority of his unconscious teammates with his insects had only made it harder on both his body and chakra. They were both at an all-time low at this point. And Niji Nezen? Why you protected me? Hinata commented meekly, shock running through her body as Niji panted tiredly over her. During the entire jutsu, he had focused all of his energy into protecting her. It's my duty. The least I could do. He managed out between pants, mouth agape in an attempt to catch his breath. In his mind, it was his way of apology for what he did during the Chunin exams. But you dash. It's fine. He breathed out, panting before falling to the ground. Luckily he was still conscious. What the fuck was that? Tayuya yelled aloud, standing shakily to her feet, and Hinata's head swiveled to her, surprised. How had they made it to their location? From what Niji explained, she had assumed they'd escape. Had they followed after them? Her teammates weren't far away from her and were able to make it to their feet, still carrying Sasuke in the demon coffin. What remained of the Fighting Leaf Shinobi were Hinata, Shino, Sakura, and Tenten, but everyone else were alive. It was a miracle really, considering the circumstances. A resounding boom echoed the area as a fast-moving blur smashed into the ground, pushing smoke high into the air. When it cleared, Jirobo was up on his feet with a deadly smirk, completing the sound for. It's about time you decided to join us. I was beginning to think you ran away or something. Sakan commented with his own smirk, joining his teammate. Humph, I agree. You took entirely too long. Kidamaru said. Did you even take care of your target? Heh, just mind your own business. Jirobo said offhandedly, looking for the brat that had beat him. He had to pay for that in death and nothing less. Sakan only hummed, he would forget about it for now because they had higher priorities to deal with. Specifically the floating earth above them that was somehow formed by the earth. He could only wonder what was going on, but he had no way of knowing. He was sure that it wasn't the Konoha ninja that did it, however. They looked just as confused as them. There he is. Jirobo yelled suddenly, spotting Niji through the cloudy area from high levels of debris floating through the area. Before anyone could stop him, he leaped into the air and brought his hands together, aiming to smash the brat into the ground. Hinata only squeaked rather loudly upon seeing the ninja. She frozen in her spot and covered herself as she allowed the powerful ninja to hit both her and her cousin with enough force to send pounds of debris into the air as well as cracking almost 100 meters of the ground. Niji had took the brunt of the attack. Dust cleared and she could see very clearly that he was bleeding heavily. Blood flowed out of his mouth and her pupils dilated at the very sight, and her breath hitched in her mouth. She stood still as her cousin was as he laid motionless under Jirobo's powerful fist. Tears began wheeling up. And Niji Nezen. She wanted to get up and fight off the attacker, but she just couldn't find the strength to move. Her instinct to run and hide took over any instinct to defend her cousin. Luckily, someone wasn't the same. With a whisk cry of sorts, Tenten entered the scene with her self-made weapon in hand and forced the tank of the Sound 4 back with a swing that was aimed at his head. She landed softly on the ground in a crouch, aiming a withering glare at the Sound Ninja. Who do you think you are? Tayuya asked with a grin, leaping beside her partner. I was quite enjoying that, you see. Tenten could barely restrain herself from charging in wildly. She knew that was a death wish if what Niji said about them were true. Though she couldn't help from gritting her teeth. You bastards. Her teammates joined them only seconds later and Tenten began to look around. She was certain she couldn't take them all on at once, but she held firm. She wouldn't let them hurt Niji any further. You should back down. You'll only get yourself hurt. Sakan said, all too confident in this girl's inability to even give them the slightest challenge. Tenten smirked. Though scared, she was able to force it down enough to where it wouldn't cause any problems. Is that so? Then I'll just prove you wrong right now. She yelled, leaping high into the air. Her weapon puffed out of existence, leaving a small cloud of smoke left. 2 scrolls appeared in her hands before they began to swirl around her. Twin rising dragons. A barrage of weapons of all types rushed the fore in supernatural speeds. Her opponents, however, seemed unfazed. Is this all the girl has to offer? What a joke. Tayuya said in an almost bored tone, filled with arrogance. Jirobo only smirked before leaning over. His chakra rushed into his hands and slamming down onto the hard ground. Earth style, Terra Shield. A stocky wall rose up in defense, which was enough to protect all of the Sound 4 members. When they struck the wall, the weapons remained stuck, but Tenten was undeterred. In fact, she was smirking. This had been exactly what she was planning on. After her devastatingly quick loss to the fan-wielding Sand Kunoichi, she had thought about why she failed so miserably and set out to fix it. Debris scattered and the earth wall was blown to pieces when an explosive tag connected to all of the weapons blew up simultaneously. The impact sent the ground shaking violently and a loud boom broke through the entire area. Tenten landed on the ground in a crouch once more, panting slightly. It wasn't long before she caught her breath and stood up to see what her opponents were up to. She needed to know whether they were alive or not. When someone landed near her, she turned immediately but sighed when it was only a comrade. Good job, but the fight is not over yet. Shino said as if he already knew the Sound Force fate. She decided not to question it, choosing to get ready. Wasn't Sasuke in that explosion? Sakura asked, once she landed beside the two. They were what was left of the fighting unit for now. Hinata still hadn't moved even after all that happened. Hopefully, he's okay. Shino said. The question from the Pinkette was really for Tenten since she caused the explosion, but Shino knew what that could lead to. It was definitely something that had to be avoided, at least for now. We need to focus on beating the ones who captured him first. I agree. Tenten said, happy to chance subjects. Sakura only nodded and turned to their opponents when the smoke cleared. She gasped when she noticed the different black lines on their faces with an evil aura surrounding them. They were like totally different people than before. And they looked completely fine. Without a scratch. Not good. Shino commented offhandedly, sweat dripping down into his high collar. Damn it. No way. Tenten uttered in disbelief. How could they have survived that with no damage at all? That shouldn't be possible. Get ready. Shino said suddenly when he saw the four grin wildly and tense up. The next phase of the fight begins. Triple X. Obito wondered absent-mindedly what he would do with the huge planetoid. He supposed his only options would be to seal it or use Kamui to teleport it into his dimension, but he was sure that it would take a substantial amount of chakra. He had the chakra to complete the task and even more, but he wasn't sure if he had it to spare. That was because he doubted his attack had actually killed the celestial being. Even with his lack of intelligence, Obito would not underestimate him. He could bring himself to do that simply because of how powerful Kagaya was. His doubt proved true when Yurashiki's destroyed body began to twitch before forming body parts in rapid succession. 5 seconds had barely passed before the powerful being was fully restored to normal, limbs and all. But something was different, and it even caused Obito a sliver of nervousness that he refused to let show. Yurashiki's face was bland and blank, but his eyes held absolute fury as thick veins protruded from his skin. Obito. Rin muttered in surprise, a mere bystander in a battle her eyes nor her senses could follow. She couldn't believe the true power of her teammate. She suspected that he was holding back against Kakashi during their spars the older they got, but not to this extent. Was this what he had been hiding all along? Obito, for his part, had kept his focus ahead. He would not allow Rin to be hurt for a careless mistake such as indulging in conversation in the middle of battle. He was sure he would have to face her questions at some point, but he tried to keep the thought out of his mind for now. Obito tensed when he watched Yurashiki's Rinnegan light up in its unique color. I might actually have to use my own Rinnegan if this gets too out of hand, he thought, blinking. Once more Yurashiki hand shot out, but instead of pulling the Uchiha to him, like before, the planetoid began to descend slowly, but Obito could see that it was speeding up the closer it got to the ground. For seconds, Obito was left frozen. Not of fear, but in preparation of his next move. Realistically, he could more than easily dodge the attack with ease with Kamui, but that would put not only the Earth in danger but anyone that happened to be below him. That included Naruto's friends. That was something he would not do under any circumstances. His other choice was to use Kamui to teleport the entire thing away and risk a ton of chakra in the process. If only those were his only options. What are we going to do about that? He heard Rin mutter, with a slight tremor. He was sure he'd be the same if he hadn't known what the attack was beforehand. Obito felt chakra rushed to his eyes and he swiftly leaped off his summon, ignoring his teammates' protest to the sudden action. As he soared to the falling object he felt power coursing through him and in a swift motion, he released it. When he opened his eyes he was much higher in the air and was now flying with large wings formed by his perfect Susanoo. He glared forward in determination at his target as his Susanoo's blade manifested in his hand. He felt relief flood through him and he knew why. He had been holding himself back, not wanting to show his abilities in front of his teammate. He knew for years that both Kakashi and Rin began to doubt him as his skills were harder and harder to hide from their perceptive eyes, more specifically Kakashi's Kurgan. He had been reluctant to show his more powerful abilities in fear of having his past come to the forefront, but now he was pushed to having no choice. Fighting something like an Otsutsuki required his full power and attention. With newfound power and conviction, he raced forward, splitting through air particles. He reached his target in no time at all, and in less than the blink of an eye he swung his sword. With power enough to shake the surrounding landscape, his sword sliced cleanly through the giant planetoid, sending them into two burning halves of its original size. But they were much smaller and would be easier to remove off the battlefield. He did just that, and in a total of 5 seconds his problem was all gone. He turned to face a floating Yurashiki with a hot glare on his face. Now I can focus on this one alone. And I won't let him use an attack that big again. He was sure the landscape would not be able to handle it. Shadow Clone Jutsu. An identical clone of Obito appeared inside his ethereal protection with a single hand seal. He needed no instructions and immediately exited the Susanoo, his summon catching him with ease before descending the sky quickly. It too knew the orders and was quick to obey. Rin couldn't find her voice to question her teammate as she was left in a daze of utter shock by the abilities he had displayed. She hadn't moved since she saw his Susanoo. Once close enough to the ground, the summon disappeared in a puff of smoke, awakening Rin from her daze as she landed on the ground in a safe crouch while his clone simultaneously used Kamui to eject Naruto, who landed on the ground with an oof. He was quick to desummon as well. What's going on? The Jinchuriki asked, dazed before his eyes settled on her. They immediately focused in on her before he smiled. Hey, you're that other one we came to get. Do you know where we can find Sasuke? She was about to respond until she saw another boy laid unmoving a couple of meters away from them. Instinct took over and she hopped up, surprising the Jinchuriki with the sudden action, but she paid it no mind and moved around him before crouching over the boy, giving him a scan with the eyes of a medic. Hey, that's Shikamaru! Naruto yelled in recognition and ran over. He sat beside her as she began to heal his wrapped-up head. With her skill, the process was very quick, and with a small mutter of incomprehensible words, the Nara opened his eyes. How are you doing? Rin asked as soon as she saw that he was awake, accidentally talking over him. He sat up, blinking owlishly. Fine. Suddenly his eyes gained fire, something ones who knew him would not expect. Sasuke and the others. Are they okay? He asked urgently, scanning their faces. Don't worry, Shikamaru. We were able to get everyone out safe and sound. Believe it. Naruto said, quelling his fears, and the Nara let out a long sigh of relief before he glanced out Rin. You're our other comrade we were supposed to rescue, right? Rin nodded. I suppose so. Can you stand? She asked, standing up herself and offering the newly promoted Chunin a hand. Yeah. He took her hand and was able to get up without the least bit of a misstep. Thanks for healing me. Things got a bit hectic. She nodded. It was the least I could do. You guys came to save me after all. Speaking of that, the lazy brainiac started, giving her an inquisitive look. I assumed you escaped from your captors. Any idea where they are? Tied up. She answered simply, muttering a small somewhere as she remembered the landscape around her. It was very possible they could have broke out of their restraints or been crushed to death. It was hard to tell. Hey, what the heck is that? Shikamaru asked rather loudly as he pointed abruptly at the sky. Rin knew what he was asking about but turned around to look again almost automatically, and Naruto did the same, although he was simply curious. It had not disappointed. Whoa! Naruto gaped, watching the giant humanoid floating above ground. Despite the nervousness the thing gave him, it looked too awesome for him to actually act on it. Rin could only sigh. It hadn't relieved any of the emotions she was feeling, but she just needed to. Her body, her brain, her feelings, nothing knew how to respond to such a sudden shock as this. It was all too much to handle at once. She gripped her chest to control her breath once it became out of her control. Obito has been lying to everyone. But why? Why would he even need to do such a thing? I don't get it. I don't understand. Hey lady, are you okay? Naruto asked in a worried tone as he saw the woman's breath had begun to build up rapidly, almost to the point that she was hyperventilating. I need answers. I need to confront him about all of this when it's over. She decided after gaining her breath, calming down with a long intake. As a collective unit, the Sound Four rushed at the standing genin with no real plan in mind other than to attack and destroy. Once they noticed that a barrier was surrounding the forest, they assumed that the lead brat somehow did it and rushed forward to make them bring it down, leaving the coffin behind them. Here they come. Shino said urgently, letting a swarm of insects out of his sleeves. Tenten beside him changed her weapon into a katana, and Sakura brought out two kunai before the Sound Ninja had reached him. The Sound Ninja realized Shino was the most dangerous and Jirobo and Sakan rush him while Sakura would fight Tayuya and Tenten would fight Kadamaru. They each jumped away from each other to give one another space, but Shino shot back a lot further as his insects swiveled through the air to cover his retreat that Jirobo tired to rush. Skidding along the ground, Shino's eyes swiveled around to find Sakan, but he was much too slow as the ninja had appeared before him in blur of black, barely materializing before he smacked Shino to the ground with the back of his hand. But Shino recovered, landing on his hands and knees before jumped by up with an uppercut that was easily blocked. Shino could do nothing as Sakan grabbed his wrist and lifted the bug user into a strong headbutt that sent him flying a couple of meters away. You're awful at taijutsu, you know. Sakan mocked with a confident smirk, and Shino grimaced in pain. He felt a warm liquid rolling down his head and knew that it was blood. Shino have to give credit where it was due. The shinobi before him was formidable. Shino was lucky that he stopped seeing in blurs fast enough see and dodge Jirobo by jumping away. He skidding along the ground as he watched the ground tear apart at the force his opponent was asserting. It was simply breathtaking. Shino grunted as he slowly got to his feet while the dust began clearing up around Jirobo. I have to admit it. I'm outmatched here. He muttered. Heh, they're having fun. Kadamaru commented offhandedly before turning to Tenten with a grin malicious enough to make her want to run away. Let's have some of our own. I have plenty of games to play. Tenten watched as he jumped and landed on a hill of sorts and reformed her stance, katana before her. Heh, let's try something easy for starters. He raised his arms and puffed up his chest before heaving a large spider web at the kunoichi. She gasped in surprise, never having seen a ninjutsu like it, but was able to react when she recognized the webbing. It was the same parts that Kiba had stuck to him. So he fought this guy. She realized, jumping out of the large webbing's way and high into the air as it stuck to several parts of the ground. She looked up to see sharp, gold-colored daggers rushing at her and knew that she was a part of his trap. It was good one, but he hadn't known something about her. She was the best at long-range fighting. With practiced ease, she whipped out a scroll and in an instant, released a flurry of weapons that overwhelmed Kadamaru's own, sending them to the ground as hers continued to rush forward. Kadamaru only smirked, not worried even in the slightest. This was only the start. Interesting. His chest puffed up once again before he spit out a webbing just as big as the one beforehand, trapping the sharp weapons. Damn it, she muttered, landing on the ground. Thought I had him. That was rather impressive, girl. Now try this. He lifted his hands into the sky and she saw the webs connected but hadn't seen the invisible webbing around her body until it was too late. Unable to move, she was strung like a piñata as Kadamaru chuckled. She began using chakra to enhance her strength, but it only caused her to struggle, never able to actually free any of her limbs. But by some grace she was able to lift her katana high enough to one of the lower webs, keeping her in place, but when she struck it had no effect. It wouldn't cut through no matter how many times she tried, and she began to get worried when she stopped because of her tired arm. It's funny to watch you struggle so much. Tenten's glare settled on him quickly and he chuckled at the sight once more. Normal weapons like the one you're using can't cut through my webbing. Nothing can. He boasted before gold daggers began raining down on her with a flick of his fingers. She openly gasped looking at the projectiles as they raced through the air. She grimaced and gripped her weapon tightly, running a large amount of her chakra through it to make the change quicker. In a blink of an eye, her weapon changed into its third and final transformation, a large circular shield with seals written on it. It was able to cover her entire front, the top of her head included, from the hailstorm of kunai that had bounced off the shield. Letting it down, she panted in heavy exhaustion for the use of her chakra in that split second. It had been the most she used at once, and that fast as well, and more than enough to exhaust her almost completely. Jumping off the hill and onto a tree, Kadamaru hung himself upside down by the webbing attached to his feet, smirking in enjoyment. That was rather impressive. It seems you're going to give me a much higher difficulty level than I was expecting. He bit his finger hard enough to draw blood and completed a multiple of hand signs before drawing a web with his other arms and slamming his hand on top of it. Summoning Jutsu. He smirked as the puff of smoke revealed his summon, the Kaidagumo. The summon had come with a large webbing that stretched a couple of meters as it hung upside down. The summon created an egg sac and Kadamaru swung across the webbing and cut it open. Immediately, to Tenten's disgust, spiders shot out of the sac and began raining down to her, and her eyes widened at their speed, which she had not been expecting. Tenten again began thrashing harshly at her restraints, but it only proved to tire her out as the would not give and she only got more stuck, barely able to hold her shield up to defend herself. The spiders swarmed around the shield to her surprise and began wrapping her up with the sticky, causing her even more discomfort as she couldn't move a single inch anywhere around her. It's game over, kid. Kadamaru yelled, cutting a string of his webbing. A flurry of kunai came from beyond the vegetation and struck Tenten from the outside of the webbing she was caught in. Unbelievable pain shot through her entire body as blood shot from her mouth, running down the webbing. Fortunately for the kunoichi, she hadn't been hit in any vital points. With a flick of his wrist, Kadamaru desummoned his baby spiders and let his webbing go soft, watching the girl fall to ground immediately, unmoving. Is that all you Konoha ninja are worth? Utterly pathetic. I didn't get much of a game at all. With Sakura things weren't looking much better, in fact, things were worse considering her skills. Tayuya was much faster than Sakura thought she was, and multiple times the pinkette found herself on the receiving end of brutal taijutsu as the redhead berated her constantly. Is this really all you can do? Throw kunai and run away? Why are you even a part of this mission if can't contribute in the slightest? I haven't used a single one of my abilities yet. She taunted. Sakura glared at her as she rubbed blood away from her mouth and nose. Tayuya wasn't super strong, but her speed made it for it, and Sakura had been hit countless times in the face before she could even react. What do I do against her? I don't have any abilities. Sakura wondered, racking her brain for anything to try and defend herself with, but to no avail. There was nothing she could do. She gritted her teeth as her head lowered to the ground, giving up. There was nothing left for her to do, and shame, frustration, and despair crept up on her fighting spirit. Tayuya sneered at her. And now you're giving up? You're nothing but worthless trash. Now prepare to go to the trash heap. Before she could rush the kunoichi, she felt a darkened presence behind her and froze, face twisting in recognition. She turned slowly and saw Kimimaro behind her with a blank look, deadly glare in place. Behind him was another redhead she hadn't seen before. Hearing the pause in movement and shift in the air, Sakura rose her head to watch the scene. Kimimaro. What are you doing here? Lord Orochimaru is dying and you four are taking too long to complete your mission. He said with an undertone malicious voice. I would kill you if not for how useful you are. Get rid of these pests. I will deliver Sasuke to Lord Orochimaru. Of course. She nodded quickly and he kept staring at her for what seemed like a year before turning and leaping over to the coffin holding Sasuke. He hoisted it up with ease and disappeared beyond her vision, the redhead staying behind and watching each of their battles carefully. Hey! Sakura yelled, releasing Tayuya from her fear. Who was that guy and where is he taking Sasuke-kun? Your mission is all for naught now. Shino had used the time the sound ninja before him gave him to think of a strategy. One was faster than him and both were stronger than him physically, so his only options was to use his brain to keep ahead and possibly win, or at the very least stall for time until one of his teammates woke up or the others finished off their own opponents. The latter seemed unlikely. He slammed his palms underground, releasing a ton of his insects inside but saving enough to attack and defend for himself while he waited for even more to hatch. He knew he had to be careful. One attempt was all he had. What are you doing? Sakan asked smirkingly with a tilt of his head. Can't you see it's all over for you? I'm not so sure about that. The bug user remarked, releasing more insects into the air that swarmed above his body. Similar to the Hyuga clan's rotation, which he got the idea from, Shino ordered his insects to spin around him rapidly to ward off any attacks as he completed a couple of hand seals. He had a small amount of insects in his body from his two plans earlier and needed to speed up the process as quickly as possible. And he had a jutsu for that. Hidden Jutsu, Insect Cocoon. A cocoon of chakra appeared around the bug user as he concentrated on letting them hatch inside his body. With the technique he would not be able to move nor concentrate on anything else, or it would not work any longer and he would not be able to do it again. Smart, Sakan muttered before his flickered over to his partner. Jirobo, if you would. Gladly. With a war cry of sorts, the strongest member of the Sound Four barreled forward with his shoulder out in front of him, but as soon as he made contact with the technique he felt his shoulder being pierced repeatedly and was forced to leap away before his arm would get ripped apart. When he stepped back he noticed that not only was his skin eaten through, parts of his muscle was as well, and some of the insects were still feeding. Surprised, he brushed it off and gripped his arm but was brought down on his feet mere seconds after having contact with the defense. Hey, Jirobo! What the hell? Sakan yelled in utter shock at seeing his teammate fall unconscious. He turned when he sensed a presence exiting the swarm of insects. It was Shino. Seems like even my new insects have the ability to use the poison I got from that mist. Poison? Confused etched on his face clearly, he turned to see Jirobo's skin turning blue, more deeply at the point of injection. Shino pointed at him and Sakan turned to him in a hurry. Now it's your turn. A swarm of insects broke the ground underneath the sound ninja, trapping him in between them. Unfortunately, these insects hadn't had the poison in them, but that didn't stop them from sucking the chakra from the ninja. Sakan grunted harshly at the force the insects were exerting on every single part of his body. It made it difficult to move, but he was strong enough to keep the insects from crushing him despite Shino's orders. Inside his twin's body, Yukon preformed hand seals. Combined transformation. Using both his chakra and his brother's, Yukon was able to preform the transformation, turning them into a small bug. Sakan, having control and knowing what his brother was doing, left the confused swarm and immediately transformed back into his own body when he was far away enough. Once he did, the swarm again rushed him, but this time he was ready. With his superior speed, he rushed at Kiba and literally kicked him in half with a kick fast enough for the bug user not being able to react. It was revealed to be a bug clone when both parts dissolved into insects. He watched the two swarms add on to one another, but even after then, they made no moves to attack him. He can only control the swarm himself. Sakan thought with a smirk. And the real brat was inside that thing the whole time, but those insects have poison on them, so I can't touch them or I'll end up like Jirobo. Speaking of him, he turned to look at his partner and saw a redhead healing him with the healing jutsu. He had recognized her as one of Orochimaru's latest additions to their village. He decided to wait until Jirobo was up. Upon scanning him with her chakra, she realized Jirobo was poisoned and began using the healing chakra to suck it out of his body. She was a beginner at being a medic, but her special innate abilities made the procedure easy. Within seconds, Jirobo was again in his feet, but now he was livid. He ignored the woman that tried to stop him from getting up. Now I'm pissed. Absolutely furious, Jirobo began lifting a large slab of the earth, and Sakan watched in surprise before jumping away a safe distance as the ground he was standing on began rising. I'll squash you like the bug you are. It's complete. Shino muttered, letting his chakra rest and his swarm of insects disappear back inside his body, taking a nonchalant look at the giant boulder Jirobo had picked up. He wasn't worried in the slightest, and the sight alone threw the earth user in a fit. Die! Jirobo bellowed, settling his feet into the ground, and was just about to throw the large object when a swarm of bugs blocked his view. Suddenly the same whirlwind that had been around Shino was around Jirobo but hadn't attacked him yet. It stopped him in his tracks, however. Shino figured out quickly that if he couldn't see him, then he would most likely not throw the attack. It proved to be a correct analysis, and Shino began using his eyes to scan the area to look for Sakan. With his latest technique, he had more than enough insects to defend himself and keep up his attack on Jirobo. His mistake was the fact that he hadn't calculated Sakan's speed into the equation. You're open. Sakan whispered behind him, shocking the bug user into a stilled panic that had been another mistake. Multiple fist barrage. Sakan and Yukon combined their fist in a barrage of fast-moving punches that sent Shino flying several dozen meters into a tree that shattered under the force. Immediately, the swarm around Jirobo disappeared and returned to Shino, who hadn't moved an inch since he'd been hit. He's actually not bad. Sakan complimented with a smirk, standing beside his partner. He watched with a quirk of the head as Shino slowly began to push himself up to his knees. Die! Jirobo yelled once more. This time he launched the giant rock as Shino, who only turned to look at it before it slammed into the ground, causing everything in the vicinity to be crushed without question. Pounds of dust rose high into the air, going to Shino's advantage as his insects rose to move over to the side of the giant rock. When he fully materialized, he panted heavy on his hands and knees in complete exhaustion. He had used the rest of his chakra to escape the technique, but now he had no more to preform his ninjutsu. As the smoke cleared, the sound ninja were able to see Shino crawling away from them slowly because of his utter exhaustion. Sakan rushed forward, reaching the kid within seconds before slamming his knee into the kid's back, causing him to let blood spring out of his mouth from the force. Shino was barely conscious by the time he had been picked up by the hair and strung up before the sound ninja by the collar. Come on, kid. Make this a bit more exciting for me. Sakan remarked, punching him hard in the abdomen. Hinata watched with bated breath from the sidelines as Shino began to get pummeled. She felt rage inside her body, but her fear was quickly wilting it. She didn't believe in her abilities to help Shino. In fact, she thought she would still somehow get in the way despite Shino's predicament. She closed her eyes as tears began to build in the corner of her eyes, trying her best to hold it in and gain control over her emotions. Meters away, just before he was about to leave, Tenten began lifting herself up on her hands and knees. She could feel her body aching with pain she was unfamiliar with, but she knew that if she didn't get up, it would only put her other teammates in danger. She needed to find a way to win, whatever that cost may be. Kadamaru chuckled as the kunoichi slowly grasped her weapon and stood on her feet, her eyes wavering near constantly. I guess you still have some HP left. How annoying. Despite what he said, Tenten didn't miss the utter glee in his tone. Panting, she leaned on her weapon, which had transformed back into a staff, its standard form. Slowly, she began to take the daggers in her body out, biting her lip to hold in the screams that begged to be released. Meanwhile, Kadamaru activated his curse mark once more, this time activating level 2. Using his gold sticky web, he created a bow and used his webbing for the string. His headband fell off and his third eye opened, increasing his accuracy to even greater heights. 100% power and accuracy. He stated, his voice deeply cold. Let's see you dodge this. He released the arrow, which flew through the air with speed and power enough to cause a major amount of dust to get picked up. Tenten could barely widen her eyes and would have been hit had her teammate not interfered. 8 trigrams, palm rotation. A spinning whirlwind of chakra blocked her view, and spun so rapidly that it was able to ward off the fast-moving arrow that was simply flung away as if it were nothing but a bark of wood. Do not worry, Tenten. I will take over. Slightly injured with a small line of old blood coming from the side of his mouth, the genius of the Hyuga clan stood to protect his teammate. Kadamaru barely held in a chuckle, a grin marking his arrogant face. This was nothing more than an amusing game. Seems another player has joined our little game. I'd like to see your difficulty. Niji only remained silent and felt Tenten shift uncomfortably behind him. He knew what she was about to do and spoke without looking away from his opponent. It's fine, Tenten. I will handle this from here. No, she said, trying to keep the fatigue from showing as she walked to stand beside her teammate. This is my battle too. I can help. No, you can't. Niji told her without the least bit of hesitation. He hadn't even spared her a glance yet. You will only get in my way with the way you are now. He spoke the truth. Tenten knew this, but she still wanted to argue in some way. She was frustrated. Frustrated from her lack of power to fight anyone. First Temari, now this freak before her. However, Niji's words broke through her self-pity. He finally turned to her, slightly though. He still needed to watch Kadamaru's movements. When I say that you will get in my way, I meant that because of your injuries, not because you are weak. In fact, without you I would have not been able to complete the 8 trigrams palm rotation. It is because of you that I have come so far. So, allow me to finish this fight for you. Stunned at his words of encouragement, Tenten didn't know how to react at first. But slowly, after a couple of seconds, a small smile graced her face. Thank you, Niji. With a nod from her all-seeing teammate, she left the rest all up to him. Niji slowly turned back to Kadamaru, who still held a grin, though the emotion his eyes held were a bit more annoying. Now, Niji said slowly. It's time for our battle. Kadamaru grew excited to the point that his grin widened almost immediately. Chapter 48. Involuntarily, Urashiki gulped as the armor of chakra glared at him with such intensity it would put a star to shame. He'd seen this technique before, so many times, in fact, that he was capable of ignoring the sheer power that flowed through them. But faced with Obito's intense hatred, he could barely keep his face blank, his confident smirk that was always plastered on his face disappearing before he even knew. This guy. He muttered in apprehension, wondering what was it that made his hatred so potent. Obito was indeed livid. It was not for the fact that anyone had been killed, he used his sensory abilities to make sure of that, but it was simply for the fact that he was an Otsutsuki. Despite his apprehension on fighting Kagaya, he was well aware of his intense hatred for her, Black Setsu, and Madara. He had killed Madara, but the other two were ones he really had his eyes on. Madara was nothing more than a pawn like himself, but way back when, he killed the bastard to cleanse the earth of a bad soul. Although, he couldn't say he didn't do it for what the elder Uchiha had did to him. He had not gotten over it no matter how far away it was ago. You must really have it out for me, huh? The celestial being was able to mask his slight hesitation with an act of continued confidence. Obito wasn't for any more talking. Suddenly, he raced forward and reached the Otsutsuki so quickly that it was like he was an afterimage. He was barely able to put his arms up to block the massive fist that was fast enough it seemed to dissipate clouds and was sent spiraling through the air at uncontrollable speeds. Damn it, he gritted after attempting to right his movements only to fail. He didn't notice Obito was still rushing until he felt a huge presence above him. Obito was that fast. An axe handle strong enough to shatter a mountain slammed into Yurashiki and he was sent into another, more powerful spiral that sent him crashing into the ground. Wind and dirt flew in all directions around the impact, almost able to pick up trees out of the ground roots and all. Obito only looked down at his handiwork with a small bit of confidence. He knew the Otsutsuki was far from dead, but he was sure that if he was this strong then he actually had a chance to beat Kagaya if she ever were to emerge. Not that he would let that happen. He preformed a single seal, and with a flare of chakra the fiery round surrounding the forest began to disappear from the top. He decided he would no longer need the barrier. He was confident he would be able to keep up with the alien in his Susanoo. Suddenly, bright blue chakra shot out of the crater down below and speed at the Uchiha. He looked as if it weren't there at all. Obviously, he didn't see it as a threat. The perception of his Sharingan caught its path almost immediately and he commanded his Susanoo to barely lift a hand to block the futile attempt to hit him. The deep chakra came into contact with his legendary chakra armor unique to the Uchiha, but it didn't even graze the technique, merely being deflected until it slammed into the ground in the distance, causing a huge explosion that could barely be felt from where they were. The entire time Obito only stood passively, looking blankly at his opponent below. Below, on the ground, the dust began to settle and slowly Yurashiki was revealed with an almost pathetic look on his face. Obito wanted to laugh at the guy. His hand was outstretched, but instead of his normal hand, and chakra cannon roughly the same size stood in its place. Yurashiki had a look of utter disbelief on his face. All of his attacks, or strength, did nothing to the Uchiha before him. Once the war had started, their clan had made sure to look up every member on each clan of Konoha, and among them, Sasuke was the strongest by far. No one's power but Naruto's even came close to his. But how was this man doing even better than he was? Perhaps, their information was wrong. Go figure. Yurashiki's near the others. Doing anything while he's down there will only cost problems. Obito realized, keeping eyes on his target. He was fortunate enough to pay attention to such details before he started getting rallied up. He hated to admit it, but he loved the challenge of battle. Especially with strong opponents. Obito decided the Susanoo was of not use in such a limited space and deactivated it as he descended to the ground. Within seconds, he landed safely on the ground before the Otsutsuki and merely stared. Yurashiki thought he meant it in a mocking sort of way and grew increasingly adry the longer the two stared at each other. I have a question for you. Obito asked with a bit of uncertainty but was sure that none of it showed. He had to make his opponent never saw any weakness. A woman of your clan, Kagaya Otsutsuki. Do you know who that is? The furrowing of the alien's eyebrow gave nothing away to Obito, but it made him curious. How does he know of our clan? That should not be possible. Then Kagaya. She was sent her a long time ago as well as the other. But I haven't sensed her at all, so how does he know about her? Yurashiki smirked, not letting what he was thinking show outwardly. You'd think I'd tell you anything about her? You're truly a fool. The smirk that lit up the Uchiha's face wasn't the reaction Yurashiki was expecting. I truly wonder who is the fool. You just answered my question. Yurashiki was appalled, and this time he could not keep that emotion from showing. He mulled over the Uchiha's question, and once he thought of his response he froze. He had been had. With staggering anger that forced the ground near him to shatter, he rushed the Uchiha in utter vengeance. He would pay for embarrassing him. Obito's enhanced eyes picked up on all paths he would take before he even reached halfway towards him. Yurashiki lashed out with a wild right that Obito ducked under but was forced back to dodge a spinning kick from the Otsutsuki. Using the same foot he landed on, he rushed forward to engage the alien once more, but Yurashiki's own enhancements proved reliable. Obito's outstretched arm, aiming a punch near his face, was smacked away hard enough to turn the Uchiha's entire body around, but Obito was unrelenting. He moved swiftly before Yurashiki could take any advantage over his position and spun into a backhand with his left. Yurashiki used his own to block the attack, and Obito hid his arm in his cloak to hide the fact that he had drawn a kunai from his pouch. Spinning again, but this time to his right, the sharp metal lashed out. Yurashiki had not seen it coming, and that moment of hesitation would have allowed Obito to cleanly decapitate him. If not for the Rinnegan. An invisible force stopped his momentum in his tracks, and the Rinnegan glowed. Almighty push. Suddenly, gravity pushed outwards and Obito was launched backwards at a speed he could barely see. But he could still see. He righted himself midair and began making hand seals, using his feet to keep himself from getting hurt as he kept spinning and occasionally touching the ground. Finally, he finished his seals and pursed his lips, picking the right time to launch his attack. Fire style, Fireball Jutsu. The searing hot, grand fireball torched the ground as it rushed Yurashiki, but he smirked and used his fishing pole to gather the chakra for himself. Poor you, right? Didn't know I could absorb ninjutsu, did you? He hadn't realized the spiral that had appeared behind him, that Obito swirled out of. He was sent flying right over the ground from a well-aimed kick to the back by Obito, but righted himself almost immediately and lashed out with his pole, the fishing rod extending far. Obito jumped high and dodged the attack and leaped at the Otsutsuki, causing him to grit his teeth in anger. He fixed himself in the air and landed on his feet, whipping his arm down to guide the rod up at the Uchiha. He maneuvered through the air several dozen times to dodge, his speed not decreasing in the slightest, and gaze laser focused on Yurashiki. The earth beneath Yurashiki crumbled and shattered when Obito broke through all of Yurashiki's defenses and slammed a fist into his face, sending him into the ground. Obito glared hard at Yurashiki, his fist pushing down on his face before he let out a yell and pounds of earth exploded into the air when he put on even more of his strength. How's that? Obito asked deeply, hands still holding the Otsutsuki on the ground. Yurashiki's Rinnegan began to glow dangerously. How arrogant! An invisible force of gravity once again forced Obito away, but this time he threw a kunai with wire on it into the ground, and as soon as Yurashiki's technique was over he pulled on it with tremendous force. He tugged himself harshly into the ground and threw his knee out, which slammed Yurashiki in his abdomen hard enough the ground simply could not keep up anymore. It broke apart and Yurashiki fell into a natural reservoir of water that had been several hundred meters in the ground. He plopped into the water and Obito stood next to the entrance and kept his gaze inside. Searching, no expecting movement. Triple X. Rin hadn't even moved as she watched Obito's fight with that creature. From whatever she could see, that is. Most of their movements were far too fast for her eyes to comprehend. It was like they were simply light-colored blurs of energy so fast and destructive that land beneath her feet didn't even stand a chance. She was so distracted that she hadn't noticed that the kids she had just been with were long gone. Had Obito always been this strong? He was like a god, in every sense of the word. The powers he displayed, she felt, could easily destroy level an entire country, and then some. He had more chakra than every other inhabitant of Konoha combined. Dark doubts wavered her judgment on her teammate. She believed he was good, all of his actions had suggested that, but with power like that, always came fear. She knew he was hiding something, both she and Kakashi suspected it. But this was something she was not expecting they to be. And even then, something made her think that this was not the only thing he was hiding. She blinked, gathering the features of a shinobi rushing past her. He was carrying Sasuke. She realized the fact when she felt his chakra from inside of that coffin. She took in a shaky breath, turning around to give the last location of her teammate one last look. Her vision of the teammate she thought she knew fading away. She turned and leaped away, following after the white-haired shinobi. Triple X. Pupils dilated and hair ragged, Sakura panted heavily on her hands and knees. Blood was running down her broken nose from another beating by Tayuya, who had become even more harsh after the appearance of another one of her comrades. She could barely breathe out of her nose and had been using her mouth to do the job. She had decided she would not give up and tried her best to get away to chase after Sasuke, but every single attempt had her given a worse beating by Tayuya to the point where she couldn't even run or jump anymore. She knew by now that believing that she could go to Sasuke was nothing more than a childish fairy tale. She knew that she had no special abilities or anything that made her stand out from her amazing peers. Even people like Choji, who wasn't the skinniest guy, could fight, and Shikamaru, who she was sure had trained less than her, had special abilities and stood out. Hell, even Ino could do something, while she could not. It was more frustrating and heavy on her mind than she would show. She let out a pained yelp when a foot slammed her into the ground. Tayuya smirked as her foot crushed Sakura's body into the ground by her back. "You were a fun punching bag. But I'm ending this." Sakura was able to turn her head enough to catch a glimpse of the sharp glint of a kunai, but didn't even have the energy to move. Her body felt heavy, the toll of non-stop movement and being hit constantly taking drastic effects. But still her eyes were strong, defiant. Even if she would die, her will would not be broken. As the kunai plunged down to her, her mind began to go through memories. All of her good ones. With her family. With her friends. With her teachers. The floor of it all never seemed to end. This was the end. She would die. "Get away," a voice yelled, and Tayuya let out a pained grunt when a powerful foot kicked her away in the jaw. From Sakura. She glanced up with what remained of her strength and saw the tightened face of Naruto, twisted in anger. His clenched fist shook uncontrollably and his chakra fluctuated wildly. He was furious. "Naruto," she managed to mutter, eyes beginning to waver. Tayuya wiped blood off her lips with a glare, standing on her feet. She hadn't even seen the brat until it was too late. Another one? How many weaklings are they going to send to the slaughter? I'd say enough to defeat you guys. Using in release, Shikamaru controlled his shadow to latch onto Tayuya's, freezing her movements in a moment of utter shock for her. "And Naruto," Sakura muttered again, and this time Naruto heard her. Worried, he crouched down to see what she had to say and watched with dilated pupils as his friend began to cry. "I'm weak, Naruto. I shouldn't have been brought on this mission." What are talking about? You're just as important as everyone else here." Naruto yelled, his fiery temper from his mother coming to the forefront. Sadly, his teammate disagreed. "No, I'm not. When it really matters, I can't do anything to actually contribute to the team. I just slow you all down." "That's not true," Naruto refuted heatedly. "She was just stronger than you. Not even Sasuke is stronger than everyone. He was kidnapped, remember?" "Naruto," she said slowly, forcing him to look her in the eye with the expression she was giving him. "Name one special ability that I have that stands out from any other ninja." He spoke immediately, but just as fast, cut himself off. He couldn't come up with anything that she could actually do. When a look of pity crossed his features, she forced a smile on her face. "It's okay, Naruto. I already knew what the answer to the question was before I even asked you." Tears began to fall from her eyes in heavy doses, and she was no longer able to keep the fake smile on her face. "That's why I beg you to bring Sasuke back to me. To us. Someone with white hair took him away. So please bring him back safely." She had yelled those words out and fell unconscious right after. She had used the rest of what remained in her body to tell Naruto that. He let in a slow breath and his fist clenched by his side before he let it out before him. "I promise, Sakura. I will bring Sasuke back. Bastard, Tayuya uttered with strained breath, struggling to move under the special restraints placed on her. You've already lost. Don't listen to her, Naruto. Shikamaru advised, body shaking from keeping Tayuya in place. If what Sakura said is true, then we don't have much time. Get going. Now. But dash. I'll handle her. Shikamaru interrupted, already knowing the Jinchuriki's next words. Get going. Sasuke needs you. A little hesitation in his steps, Naruto nodded and leaped away. When the blonde was out of sight, Shikamaru sighed and turned to his new problem. He released his shadow from Tayuya, panting slightly. He needed to save chakra. Why do I always get the girls? Triple X. With an inaudible gulp and a whole lot of hesitation, Sarada opened her father's left eye to decipher the stone tablet in full. The more she read, the more she saw why her family had killed each other. She could see why they were going to start a civil war. Most of what she read she already knew about. Her father had given her these details in certain amounts. Her heart began to ache when she thought about him. She began to feel lightheaded, able to hear every thump her heart made. She clutched her chest, reeling, and she began losing her breath. She tried to calm down and rooted herself in place. But it didn't work, and her breathing became more ragged as she fell to her knees, clutching her chest even tighter. To the point where her shirt was about to tear. Then a hand landed on her. It's okay to cry, Sarada. I'm sure holding in how you fell isn't good for you. A sharp intake of breath and her head shot up to the voice, only to see her teammate giving her a soft smile. Mitsuki? He said nothing more, rubbing her back in a slow pattern as she began to calm down. Once she was calm enough to where her breath stabilized, he spoke in a calm tone. Sarada, what are you doing down here? Boruto has been looking for you. He asked, stepping back to give her space and standing to his feet. Sarada stood up and looked away from her teammate, keeping her eyes on the tablet. When Sarada didn't speak after a while, Mitsuki narrowed his eyes but kept his distance. The Uchiha stone tablet. I'd never thought I'd see it. It's truly fascinating. It would be even better if he could actually read it. But he knew of its contents, or at least some it. That was by the research from his parent. How do you know about this place, Mitsuki? I could say that I knew about this the entire time. Or I could say that I simply followed you here on a whim. He said vaguely with a minute tilt of the head. But that's not the point of all this, is it? Mitsuki stepped up until he was a couple of meters away from his teammate. He watched without a word as her hand twitched. What you say and how you feel are very different, Sarada. You say you're fine, but the look in your eyes say different. I can see the hate, the rage, the sorrow, the vengeance, and the love in your eyes. I can see it all. By this point, Sarada had been barely keeping herself still. Her body was twitching uncontrollably, ushering her to release the pent-up anger that had been bubbling up inside her for so long. You've thought about hurting us? Haven't you, Sarada? Mitsuki felt himself tense when the entire room went cold. His chakra began to become riled up. The curse of hatred has plagued your clan for decades. If you don't stop now, you will continue what would lead to your clan's demise. I know the pain you dash. You don't. She spat out, turning to him with both her Sharingan and Rinnegan blazing. He could feel every emotion in those colored orbs and his body shuddered. The strongest one was absolute rage. Your father is still alive as well as your family. While mine dash. She cut herself off with an uneven breath before swallowing the vial that wanted to escape her body. When Mitsuki felt she was done, he started once more. It's impressive. I don't think any Uchiha has possessed both the will of fire and the curse of hatred. Both of these ideals are rooted inside you and fight for control. I know I can't do anything that will make either one conquer the other. Only you can decide that. But I will say this, if it comes to it, his eyes hardened, and unlike how he is most of the time, his face took on a serious look. I will kill you. Boruto is the light, the sun that I believe will guide us to a new peace." Suddenly, without warning, a spark of lighting in Sarada's hand erupted into a Chidori. The room turned tense, and their standoff had caused them to be unaware of the shadow that swiveled back into the shadows from the light the Chidori caused. Pure anguish was on the Uchiha's face, but her body hadn't moved an inch. The level her chakra had increased to by the implant of the Rinnegan was more than surprising to the snake user, and his face showed it. He even gulped. Suddenly, the lightning sputtered out and her face shifted into a surprised look. Tears began to fall down her cheeks and her knees gave out. She would have hit the floor if Mitsuki hadn't caught her. I am sorry," she forced out through sobs, covering her face. I am sorry." As they consoled each other, the figure watching the scene chuckled in amusement. He looked over at the stone tablet in glee. He had added a new rule. One that would change anyone reading it. XXX. I never thought paperwork could kill people. Shikaku grumbled internally, slumping over on a small space of the desk that had been cleared. He had just did 5 large stacks of it all, and now he was exhausted. He was really starting to regret getting that promotion from Anko. "You should really cheer up, Shikaku-san," Shizen said with a soft smile, face half lit in amusement as she carried her dressed-up pig around. "Wrinkles are easy to get at your age." Shikaku only rolled his eyes. "If this paperwork doesn't kill me first," he grumbled before sighing. "Did Tsunade even do anything? I feel like it's the same amount since I left her in here." At that, Shizen turned her head a bit sideways and gave a nervous chuckle, and Shikaku frowned at her and raised his head with a comical glare. "Well," she drawled, shrugging her shoulders slightly in mock ignorance. "You let her get drunk instead of doing her work, did you? Then both of you pawned it off on me." "I have no idea what you're talking about," she said, turning her entire body towards the door. "Anyway, you have fun doing that." Before he could say another word, she was out the door. "Damn it," Shikaku muttered, his head falling sloppily back onto the desk. He was near sleep when the door opened and multiple people stepped inside. He looked up lazily and saw Kakashi, Itachi, Guy, and a hobbling Shursui on crutches. "Oh, you're Hokage again?" Shursui asked with small teasing smile. "Tsunade already kicked the bucket, huh?" "Oh, har har," Shikaku huffed, slowly raising his head and let it rest on his hand. "I'm stepping in for Tsunade while she completes the surgery. What do you guys need?" Shursui shrugged in good nature. "I'm just following these guys. Didn't want to sit around in a bed all day." "If Rin Senpai were there, you'd be in bed all day. Like you're supposed to," Itachi told his friend with a mirth of a smile. By that time the 4 had reached the front of the Hokage desk. "Speaking of her," Kakashi said, holding a letter before Shikaku between his fingers. "This was brought in just a couple of minutes ago. It's from her." Guy seemed to get pumped immediately and closed the distance between his rival in the blink of an eye. "I heard what happened to the youthful Rin. Why didn't you tell us you had received a letter from her, my rival?" Kakashi only stared, body leaning in indifference. He wasn't annoyed by the lack of personal space that Guy seemed to disregard. He was more than used to it. "Like I said before, it just came in." "Let me see it." Shikaku held out a hand and Kakashi turned back to him and handed him the letter. He was quick to read the letter but showed no outward emotion. Until he sighed. "Yamato is a traitor," he said slowly. Guy wasn't in the squad but knew the Umbu very well. So to find out he was a traitor he didn't know how to feel. "That can't be right," Shursui objected outright, stepping up to the desk. "He's been a loyal shinobi for years. There's no reason to assume otherwise." He turned to Itachi. "Don't you agree?" Itachi only closed his eyes softly. "I'd like to hear what our former captain says about it before I make my own decision on the matter." Kakashi felt it was his turn to speak, so he did. "I have no idea what to make of this. Rin doesn't lie, not about things this important. But she could have made some sort of mistake. The master of the body flicker argued. She's human after all. There's not much mistakes that can be written here. Shikaku told him, gaining the room's attention. He sighed, already feeling the massive headache that he felt would not subside anytime soon. Kakashi and Guy, I want you two to head to her location immediately. If you have time, try to assemble a team. Shursui only gritted his teeth. Something like this couldn't be right. Could it? There was no way someone as nice as Yamato could be a traitor to the village. The wood user had saved him on many occasions and was the most polite out of all of them during their Umbu days. Shursui decided that he wouldn't believe something like this. Not until he saw it for himself. I'll go too. No, you'll stay here while you are still hurt. Itachi interrupted, giving him a sharp gaze with a single glance. The Uchiha knew what the other was thinking. That's not for you to decide. But it is for me. Shikaku said, sitting up from his earlier slouch. You are too valuable to the village to be sent out injured. Stay here. I will make sure he will. Itachi said and watched with indifference as his cousin fumed but said nothing more. Shursui was stronger than him on any regular day, not meaning he couldn't beat him, but while injured the curly-haired raven stood no chance. Thank you. Shikaku nodded. Dismiss. With that, the four shinobi left the room and Shikaku was forced to let out a tired sigh. Now, once again something was happening. I can't panic. He thought. It will solve nothing. Rin has said she's captured both him and Kabuto. Perhaps they only need to be picked up and brought back here. The Nara would go with that. At least, until he was proven incorrect. Did all of this happen like this before, Obito? Triple X. The ground trembled, threatening to crumble into dust. The longer the trembling continued to happen, the more damage the ground took. Even miles away, the ground began to split apart and shake with such force that entire trees were uprooted and fell down. Even cliffs and hills in the distance began having rock and other non-stable objects began causing multiple rock slides. So you could imagine what could be happening near the source. And Obito stood within it. He only glared down at the hole in the earth beneath him, watching the water below him thrash about like a raging river. He kept himself rooted to the ground with chakra, unmoving but body poised for action. The clothes in his body danced when the force began to create a sharp wind that rippled through any loose items in the area. Obito, with his Sharingan, watched with no sort of reaction as Urashiki shot out of the hole in the ground. Water leaked off his soaked clothing but he paid it no mind seemingly as he floated high into the air, Obito watching him intently the entire time. So much chakra. Obito could see the large chakra circulating inside of the Otsutsuki and had no idea how he could have more than he did originally. In fact, it was getting close to what he remembered Kagaya having. Obito himself had used quite a bit with his Susanoo but had more than enough to output any other of his stronger techniques with no problem. And even then, he was gaining more chakra by the second. This humiliation, the pale being gritted out somewhat scathingly, glaring down at his wretched foe whose figure stood immovingly stiff. Cannot continue. You will not mock me, you damn mortal. His palm shot opened and his signature weapon materialized without hesitation. Obito's face scrunched in concentration when the Otsutsuki swung his blazing rod, releasing a barrage of chakra hooks into the air, barreling down at the Uchiha. Dull-faced, the time traveler stood unmoving and seemingly let the projectiles find him. They smashed into the ground where he stood with enough force to completely destroy the surrounding area. The ground was stained with dark burn marks where the attacks had landed. The ground was broken and cracked, barely fitting together. Utter glee was on Urashiki's face and he was about to shout out his victory when a giant, gray hand shot out of the low smoke that clouded the ground. Urashiki was caught off guard completely, the speed too fast to avoid while being surprised and was grabbed out of the air. He gritted his teeth in pain, a tremendous force applied to every part of his body from the neck down. He could not move a single bit and the pressure was beginning to take effect on more than just his movements. Out of the smoke, a large head resembling a ghoul pushed beneath the foggy cloud beneath and glared right into the face of Yurashiki, momentarily surprising him into a full stop. In the middle of it all was Obito, eyes glowering with tint of unforgiving anger. He knew it would grow stronger when he faced Kaguya. Suddenly, his chakra fluctuated. The design in his left eye began spinning rapidly before it awakened the Rinnegan. Glowing vividly, the holy eyes forced Yurashiki to look the Uchiha in the face, and a bead of sweat began to fall down his face. He could feel his chakra being seeped away from him and knew it was from the Rinnegan. "What do you know about Kaguya Otsutsuki?" It was not a question with an answer of no. And Obito wanted to make sure the alien knew. His Susanoo followed his orders and began to squeeze the Otsutsuki hard enough to cause blood to seep out of his mouth as he made gurgling sounds. His head being forced facing up because of the unbelievable pain. "And I want all you know.